I was a cashier at Lover's Stop in Denver, and I had been in the night shift from the first day that I've joined. I was just out of the school, and I needed to fund my college tuition, so I decided to support myself. Ivy League colleges were out of question, so it was in the job to support myself and pay off the community college fees. So I worked the night shift, even if it was the scariest thing for someone just out of school and living at least 6 miles from where I used to work. This story took place around when I was a month in the job. There was a truck that rushed into the shop. A man very panicky and looked entered the door and started talking up things. He came with all that and then checked into the cash counter and threw in $200 bills and rushed out. His total was $250, but he was already out the door and I shouted, "You are $50 short, man." And he looked back at me with angry eyes and said, "What the fuck did you just say?" I looked at him nervously and said, "I said you are $50 short, man." He stared at me angrily and said, "Who do you think you are, punk?" I politely said, "I didn't mean to offend you, sir, but my boss will be on my ass if I am short." The man looked at me and said, "I don't have time for this, kid. I don't give a fuck about you." And as he said that, a truck came in a rush pulling in, and the man looked at me and said, "Shit, man. Look, tell them that I'm not here, all right?" And I looked at him and said, "Dude, your truck is outside. What the hell am I supposed to say?" He looked at me, and as he went back to the door, he said, "Make some shit up, dumbass." And as he exited, the angry guys came real close, and they asked me where the guy was, and my mouth was sealed shut. Even though the guy was practically rude to me, I said nothing. I did not snitch. And the guys left, but as they did, they trashed the guy's truck. When the room was clear and they were long gone, the guy came out, and first thing he did was apologize to me and said, "I'm sorry, man. I was rude to you before. These guys are grade 8 assholes and I don't have my breakup yet." And I replied, "They left a message. They said that tell the pussy that they will be back tomorrow right here." The man looked relaxed. "Don't worry about that. Here, take it and keep the change." He handed me $100 bill and left and said, "A piece of advice, kid. Don't be here tomorrow. It will get ugly." The next day when I got back to the ship, I saw the same man and he told me to wait in the truck. And as I waited, it was the horror that I witnessed from there. And people were just constantly shooting each other and there was bloodshed. I witnessed it all in horror. And suddenly, I saw guys together. One of them pulled me out of the truck and asked, "What the hell are you doing here, man?" And I said, "I'm just a cashier, man." They dropped me and told me, "You forget our faces and shut the hell up, or you get stitches." I confirmed and shut my mouth until now, when I heard they were all caught and some died in crossfire with police. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. Have you ever had one of those days where you think that a place that could be responsible for feeding a lot of people, a place that can be a stop for the travelers, and in all, a place that can be a haven to the food lovers who turn out to be the bloody battlegrounds between two kids enraged with hormones and pure intention of killing each other? And to bear witness to such monstrosity as a child is something of a trauma that I just cannot seem to get over with, even though now I have learned to cope with it. But there are nights when the incident of a night in McDonald's haunts the life out of me. It was the damn 80s. Everything was changing in front of our eyes. Life was pacing at a speed where you had to either catch up or get left behind. And I was not the one to get left behind. I was a kid. I must have been 12 or 13. Pretty grown up and pretty much capable of imagining the scenarios in the most vivid way possible. I had a friend, Carl. Carl had the same interests and we hung out a lot and talked about a lot of things. Star Wars, basketball, and a lot of science stuff. We were practically nerds. Carl, like every boy in the school, had a crush on Sydney, but I don't think Sydney knew it because Sydney probably knew that the whole school crushes on her. So in the vastness of school where there are artists, jocks, and practically everyone above than a nerd like Carl and me, So Sydney probably didn't even know that Carl exists, but Carl was in love with her. At least that is what he said to me. I told him to confess his feelings about her. He refused, and I told him, "Look, man, there's nothing to lose here, is there? Sydney probably doesn't even know that you exist, so the worst that could happen is that she will say no, but even then, it is the best thing that she will know you." It was the much-needed optimism that Carl needed, and he pushed himself to confess his feelings before the term ends. And he decided to act on my motivation and mustered enough courage to go and tell her everything. He went on to confess everything, and as he walked over to her, she said, "Oh, hi, Carl." He came back and told me that she knew who he was, and she wants her help with the project. It was a great day for my friend Carl. The guy loved her for so long, and now finally, he had the chance to be with her. He waited for her at her home. It was really amazing that a girl like that would have anything to do with us, the geek and nerds. It was something unbelievable for us. The next morning, I waited for him to tell me what all had gone down, and then he said she never showed up. I consoled my friend and told him that it's all right. Maybe she was caught up, and then he said that he saw her walking into the neighborhood McDonald's when he was running an errand. Carl was angry and wanted to confront her about it, but she wasn't in the school. And then an emergency assembly was called, and it was declared that she was murdered last night. This was something that put my friend into shock, and he couldn't even process his grief, so he stayed silent for a while, and then walked out of assembly. And probably because he was the last one to see her, he quickly decided that there is something that police should know, and straight away walked out of the school and told police about seeing Sydney enter McDonald's late. Carl was an emotional wreck. And then one day, after missing for a week of class, he came back and told me, "It is the cashier at the McDonald's. He killed her." I told him he was being irrational if he did that. The police will catch him. He should inform the police about it, and then he said he did, but they don't believe him either. He said, "I just want you to be there when I confront him." I agreed to do it. It's the least bit that I can do. We went to that McDonald's to confront him and waited for the time when there were less people in the joint, and we found the perfect time at around 10 at night, and we entered, and Carl decided to confront him. But the cashier got really agitated with the questioning, us knowing that we are weak to do anything. He wasn't going to give us anything. And then I don't know when my friend did what he did, and there was knife stabbing right across the cashier's hand, and he was screaming in pain. And then my friend took the knife and put it around his neck, and then the cashier retaliated and was now punching Carl, but then Carl stabbed him again. But this time, the knife fell out of his hand. Without a weapon, intimidation is something that neither Carl was good at nor me. But then, in the gist of things, Carl took a revolver out of his sock and pointed toward the cashier, and he stopped in his path and looked at us in fear. And Carl screamed, "Admit that you killed Sydney." And I was taping the whole thing for the evidence, and then he said, "Yes, I killed her. I didn't mean to. She came in looking so hot and beautiful. I asked her where she was going, and she said that she was meeting a potential future boyfriend, and I said that I'm going to be her boyfriend. She said no." As the man kept on talking, I saw that my friend was tearing up about the thought of the future the man just robbed him of, and he continued, "But she wouldn't just listen to me, and I took her to back alley, and my friend Jerome there helped me, and we decided that, have her if we can't really have her, so we drugged her burger, and took her to the back alley and dropped her in our van." And then he pointed towards Jerome, who had called police by now and was waiting in the corner. The man was confessing everything, and then he said, "And then we took turns on her. It was me first, and then Jerome. We forced ourselves upon her. I'm sorry, man. It was all in the moment when I realized what I had done. It was too late. I choked her." And then the man, bleeding from his mouth and in the most psychopathic laugh ever, laughed and said, "Jerome, didn't ever gotta go." My friend was now in range, and he put the gun point blank at his head and shot him without hesitation, without feeling anything but rage. Even the dead man possessed his death late, and there was fear in his eyes as he was looking up at Carl, a 14-year-old kid with only vengeance in his eyes for the lover he lost. I was in shock. No words came out of my mouth, and I just stood there doing nothing. But Carl got up and said, "Hey, Jerome." Jerome looked at him, and without hesitation or anything, Carl shot Jerome the same way he did the cashier. I was in the corner where the cashier was shot. I couldn't process it. Police came in and arrested both of us, but prison was out, so a detention facility was marked for both of us. The evidence they found proved that the cashier and Jerome were responsible for Sydney's death, and this helped us gain some sympathy in front of the jury, and we got 3 years in juvenile detention center. It took my friend every bit of detention to get over what happened. We changed the cities, but we never let go of our friendship, and in a way, I don't think we will ever forget about Cindy too. I got the night shift at McDonald's. I had to start it. I had been living through the foster homes for most of my life, and some were good, but some were really bad. They were messy, and sometimes a lot of them were straight up abusive, and it was a system that I wanted to get out of. I wasn't going to spend my days living in a house that probably doesn't want me, so I decided to fend for myself. I was going to be 18 in a few months. That would mean I would be out in the world without any safety net. So I was training myself to the real horrors of the world from when I was 15. And that is when I got the night shift at the McDonald's. I thought the best way to learn about all these horror would night. Then the weirdest of creatures all tread to do all kind of sinister things. The first month working there was pretty cool. The sinister element that I exaggeratingly thought of wasn't really there. It was mostly sketchy people and characters looking odd and lurking in the dark alleyways, smoking and drinking. But nothing ever happened that could be said sinister. I waited all night. I was doing less of the work that I was giving and lurking more outwardly to the windows in hopes that something nasty would happen and I would get to experience it and know about it. I was naive in the approach of it, all like a kid excited by all the anticipation. I was almost every moment on an alert, trying to look out for trouble. One day, one of the men who was a regular customer to this McDonald's joint said, "Boy, you always look out in those alleyways from the window. Why are you doing that?" And I told him, "I'm just looking for trouble. I want to experience the rush." And he said, "Oh, you a kid right now. You don't look for trouble. Trouble finds you. And then it won't be the rush you feel, but shock and pain. Trouble is nasty and unpredictable like that." I looked at the old man and took in his words. He wasn't wrong about that. I was doing my usual day shift when Miguel, who was a regular too, came in and greeted me. "What's up, homeboy? What we cooking today? Can I get them nuggets and that OG Big Mac?" He was with a girl, and his arm was around her waist. She was a curvy woman, and his hands were busy caressing her curves. And then he looked at me, noticing his girl, and he said, "That's right, G, you can look at her. She fine as hell." And I smiled at him, and he knew that I was harmless. And then he started kissing her in front of the counter. The McDonald's only had them two and the old man in today, so it was just me and the kitchen crew, and the old man and Miguel and his girl. It was very quiet there, and only noise that was heard was the aggressive kissing noises of Miguel and his girl. I called in the order of the old man, and he took the order and sat down on the table, and he said, "Can I get some more of the Szechuan hot sauce, boy?" And I replied wittingly, "Seems like you are the one looking for trouble, huh?" The old man laughed, and he took the sauce and sat on the very seat he was at. Then a few minutes and Miguel's order was ready, but he just won't buzz. They had been kissing for 10 minutes now, and then I said the only thing he ever called me was I looked at him and called him, "Yo, Miguel, my G, your order is ready." Miguel was smiling as he came over to pick up the order, and we clicked fingers and they all sat down enjoying their meal. Miguel with his girl, the old man with his newspaper. The kitchen staff was working on the inside, and I was standing alone on the counter, thinking of scenarios. And suddenly, somebody walked through the door, and then two other followed. It was a moment of rush, and I realized what is going on. The old man dropped his burger and looked at me, and it seemed like he was trying to talk to me with his eyes, telling me, "Boy, the trouble found you." The three men came in with a shotgun, hurling it in the air, and took 2 shots in the window and said, "Act smart, you die. Do as you're told." One of the men, probably the boss, came towards me and handed me a bag and said, "Drop in all the cash in here." And I replied, "The bag is too big." He looked confused and said, "The hell you said? You just do as you're told." So I did. I took the cash and dropped all of it in his bag. I knew it was too light and the bag still had space, so instead of all the money, I dropped in paper napkins in his bag. I filled it with paper napkins and tied the bag before handing it to him. He looked at me and said, "All right, now get us 3 Big Macs and 2 cold ones." I replied, "We don't have beer, sir." He looked at me and said, "Coke will do." And I got their order ready and very calmly said, "Your order is ready." And at this point, they were circling around Miguel and his girl. I took their order and went to their table and said, "Sir, your order is ready." And the man said, "What are you waiting for? A thank you note? Get out of my face, asshole." He nudged me away as his hand was caressing Miguel's girlfriend. And then from the distance I said, "Sir, your order has been done for go. You can take your order, it is packed." I guess the man was angry and annoyed by me intruding him and his boys trying to molest that girl. The man jumped forward, forgetting about Miguel, and took his shotgun and placed it right in between my eyes. "Would it be worth dying for McDonald's? Tell me, asshole." And then I said, "I've made your order for go. The store a block down has called in the police. They heard the shotguns. So if you leave right now, you can make it out without chase with all that cash and a nice McDonald's meal. I've also put the Happy Meal toy in." He looked at me, and I guess he was intimidated by the calmness he could see in my eyes, like I was the no bullshit guy. And he calmed down, propped his gun, looked at his boys and said, "All right, let's scoot. We're done here, boys. Let's go." They left. I was calm and chill. The old man looked at me and said, "You either have massive balls or you just a psychopath." Miguel looked at me and appreciated me through his eyes. I comforted his girlfriend, got her the nice hot beverage we made in the kitchen, and her next meal was on us. The old man looked at me and said, "Boy, trouble got nothing on you." He looked at the cash register and paid me a tip. I returned to it. "Go on, take it. You just got robbed." I smiled at him and said, "The store got robbed. I am fine." They all definitely not forgetting the night at the McDonald's, and neither will those 2 idiots who think there's money in their bag. At least they will have enough napkins to wipe their ass in jail. The owner never understood why I left even after hailing a hero and being promoted. Well, you see, when I was filling the bag of the thieves with napkins, I filled another envelope with all the cash. So the reality of the trouble was that the burglars got away with the napkins, while I got away with all the cash. That was just a little heist that I pulled off in McDonald's when I was 15. I have a lot of stories about such hustles. I am 30 now, almost 15 years from my first hustle, the hustle at McDonald's. I got $2,500 from it. And now the new hustle that I am doing will cash me in $25 million. So yes, if trouble is looking for me, tell it I'm on an island on the coast of Greece. I work accounts at the Goldberg Company, and I work the office hours, and due to the extreme workload that comes with the March filings, I have to stay late. And staying late means that you are working more, and that makes me work late hours. I don't really like piling up my work files, so I try to work them before things end. I was playing that hustle. I didn't really belong to the whole office culture thing, but like everyone else, I have bills to pay, so I do that. I was in the office late, and I used to come early and do my job and leave. Other than me, there was this one guy, Alonzo, always there. He was the one who worked like that. One night, while we were going through the files, me and Alonzo decided to bum a smoke in the back alley of the office. We were outside smoking, and then we saw something messed up. It was a figure, almost looked like it was dead, and was moving towards us. We barely could make anything of it, so we just looked at it, and as it got crippled towards us, we quit smoking and decided to head back to the office. Things were getting too weird for both of us. We decided to not talk about it and kept working. I had some files still incomplete, and he had some files, so Alonzo said, "Hey man, That was weird. So when are you leaving? And I said, I still have some files left and I will leave as soon as I am done with them. We were there for a while, and then he left. I was the only one there. And around 10 minutes later, I decided to take another smoke break. And this time, I decided not go to the back alley, and instead, I decided to go to the front gate and smoke there. I went out and saw that there was nobody, not even the guard. I stayed there for a while, and then I saw the guard in the distance in the alley, and I called him. I shouted over to him, "Hey man, Devin, you good?" And then Devin grunted and started walking really slow to me. And before he could come to me, I got back up to my office, and then I reached office. Alonzo was there. I was there and Alonzo was running through the cabinet looking for things, and he was not looking good. Put my hand on his shoulder, and as I did, he got startled and said, "What the hell, man?" And I asked him, "You good, bro?" And he replied in panic, "He bit me, man. He bit me. I was outside going home, and he bit me." And I asked him, "Who bit you?" "Alonzo, who bit you?" And he said, "The guard man, Devin. Devin bit me. He was being all weird, and now I feel weird, and you feel..." And he was talking, I could see him being all sleepy, and he fainted right in front of me. As he dropped on the floor, I couldn't help but notice his bite marks. They were bad, and I tried waking him up. And then suddenly, he opened his eyes, and he started grunting at me. I quickly stepped away from him. I was keeping my distance, and Alonzo got up and started chasing me, but he was slow. And that is when it hit me. He was bit by a zombie. That meant one thing. Devin was a zombie. With Alonzo trying to bite me, I was in a hurry, and I kept running. I ran down the building and saw that Devin was waiting at the door, and as soon as he saw me, he started chasing me. I ran to the back alley where the same figure before was lurking. I sneaked quietly and tried to get to my car as fast as I could. There were some zombies lurking in the parking lot, so there was no way I could get to my car from there. So I somehow ran and tried to get to my home as soon as possible. And I was running, and there were zombies everywhere, and there were people other than me running from them, and even people turning into one. I wasn't focusing much on any of them. I just kept running. It was then that I must have missed the turn, and I reached a dead end, a literal dead end. I tried opening up doors and tried climbing the wall, but there was no luck. I was surrounded by zombies. And then that was when I realized I will be one of them. And then they all started to come closer, and I just closed my eyes. I opened my eyes and found myself on the desk of my office. I must have fell asleep. I looked across the room, and Alonzo was still working, and I checked for any bite mark. I did find one. It was on my hand. It was a mosquito, thankfully, and not a zombie. There was once this story about Pinocchio that a man wrote. It was one of the grittiest and most sadistic things that I have ever read. The story was definitely not the child-friendly Disney version of the Pinocchio, but it was rather a sadistic version of it. And then some often argue even that the sadistic story that I have heard is the real story and not the Disney one. Even though the Disney story is more hopeful and cheerful, there's definitely something about the sadistic story that is much more real, and the chances of it being closer to reality trumps over the chances of the Disney one being real. The story starts with a man who brought in a doll from a county fair and kept it in the basement of his house. It was said the man that bought the doll wasn't really stable when it came to everyday social situations. He was bit slowly when it came to things, and he was labeled a creep in the town. Kids of the town didn't really help by bullying him constantly, and because of that, the condition that he was in was even worse than it was before, and it made him more secluded from everyone else. It all spiraled to when the man was pushing into becoming a loner, and that is when he started this friendship with the dolls and started talking to them, and his parents did see that, and even tried to get him out talking and meeting people in real life. But he tried that before, and people were not ready to accept him out in the society. And then he became a complete shut-in. It was then that his conversations started out with the dolls that he was collecting. He would start talking to them in front of the people, but every other time he did talk to them, He must have been the college age when he started keeping those dolls, and it soon became something he did very often and became the collector of the creepy dolls. It wasn't until the late summer when things changed for him. It was the mid-1800s, and the time was much harder than it was today. So some people, while he was walking out with his dolls in his hands, he was crossing the river stream passing by, when some of the guys in his town saw him, and they decided to gang up on him and bully him. He wasn't sure what he did wrong, and there was nothing that he could even do to stop that feeling. So he just crawled himself into a hamster ball and got beaten by those guys from the town. He stayed there motionless as long as he could. He just wanted the guys to go away. And when they realized that he isn't really reacting to anything, they just left away, kicking his dolls. And as they did, a man in a suit picked up the doll and looked at it and asked him as he was lying down, "Now, young man, is this your friend?" And as the man looked up as he heard the word friend, he realized that the man was not a danger. And then he looked and just slightly nodded. The man in the suit said, "Well, young man, I'm going to pay you $1,000 for this doll and teach you how to make them if you wish so." The man had no idea about anything, and he just said yes and followed him. The man showed him around the factory, and that is where he learned how to make really amazing dolls, and he was especially interested in the ceramic dolls, and most importantly, was able to find a career out of this, and went on to manufacture dolls and became an integral part of the manufacturing company. And then one day, when he had enough money, he left the company, thanked the man for his help, and decided to open up a small workshop of his own in his basement, or even buy a warehouse. He later went on to establish a workshop of ceramic doll manufacturing in his basement, and then bought a warehouse, and that is how he started his own company of dolls. It had been 10 years since he had started this, and he even had the support of the man who gave him the job when he was found down beaten by the bullies. But even after becoming so successful and rich, it wasn't enough for the people to shut up, and they went on to bully him even then. And even after the success, the people of the town looked down at him, as he was the same old man who talked to the dolls in his basement. And the man this time seemed to take it quite well. He said nothing and did nothing about it, and just focused on his work. One day, while he was coming back from his workshop, one of the bullies who bullied him years ago was strolling around with his kid, and he decided to bully him again to impress his child. He took the doll from his hands, and the bully father told his son, "Be anything you like, but don't be this creep, all right, son?" And he snatched the doll from the hand of the man, and then stomped on it, breaking it, and then went on to beat the man. This time, the man was angry, and it was almost as if that he was done by all that bullying he had been going through, and he decided to do something so vigorous that it would make his bullies regret that they ever laid a hand on him. He was a man of money now and success, so getting things wasn't really something very difficult. So he did what he knew the best. He threw some money around and acquired the family information on all his bullies. And then, when he was done with it, he hired 3 muscles, really strong big guy that could not be challenged by any of his bullies, and then ordered them to kidnap the kids of every single bully that rattled him when he was a kid. They brought the kids to the warehouse, and then the man went on to carefully turn every kid into a ceramic doll, and he did carefully where the kids won't suffocate, but couldn't even do anything. He then wrote a letter to every single one of his bullies that he has made them dolls, and they surely must want. They came and they tried threatening the man, but he was now with the big muscles. Then he said to them, "You have been bullying me for my dolls, and now I am going to bully you for your dolls. Your kids have been carefully turned into dolls. If you want your dolls to be alive again, bring the deed to everything you own and name it to me." At first they didn't believe him, but then he brought out one of the dolls and then hammered it, And the king came out of it and started running to his father. And the man said, "Well, William wasn't too much of a bully, and to be honest, he is too poor. I cannot really get anything from him, so I am letting his kid go, just to set an example. So hurry up, guys. Bring in your deeds." They all were very helpless in that moment and went and brought in the deeds for their house, farm, cattle, or anything they owned. And the man was quite joyous to see that. And he took all the deeds and set them on fire, and then brought out the dolls and ordered the muscles to break them all carefully and said, "There you go. Make your dolls real." I remember being the only child not getting disgusted by the frog that was being cut down at the table. There was nothing that flinched me. I was already doing all the intricate cutting and chopping of the dead animal parts myself on the table. The frogs were nothing compared to the animals and reptiles I was cutting by the surgical blades of my father. He was the surgeon, and it was something that was passed on to me like a gift. I was never surprised by anything gory that people were usually surprised by. I was 5 when my father took me to watch my very first surgery. It was a neurosurgery, and I saw that my father was doing the intricate surgery very calmly, and he was really good at it, and his hand never shook. My father told me that if I have to become a great surgeon, I have to be like him. Never flinch, never to get disgusted by anything, and always be straight with my emotion. Never to react to situations, just assess them carefully, and then take action. Whatever logical and most rational decision it was. So when the time came for me to dissect a frog in school, I was already ahead from every other kid. And I never flinched and was not at all scared by it. While the kids in my class were fainting, but I wasn't. I was fascinated by it on a whole nother level that people in my class did not know about. I was acing all my sciences, but I was failing on connecting with other students and limited to only the subjects. Extra activities were just distractions that I was not interested in, so I stayed close to things that I was doing. With no friends and no social life, I was able to focus on the surgery. I was killing animals to inspect them. I was curious and anxious most of the time, and this calmed me down. Dogs, cats, birds, squirrels, I had operated on most of the animals. My father knew what I was doing, and he never hesitated but helped me with everything. I wasn't sure about animals anymore, and I knew I had to move on up to operate on humans. I was 13, and I was ready to operate on humans, but my father said it would be reckless, so instead he told me to operate on all the bodies in the mortuary of his hospital, the bodies that were not claimed by anyone. He arranged it for me, and for months I would do it. I was never squeamish, and never hesitated for once with it. For months I operated on those bodies, cutting them open, learning about them and observing them. And then months in it, I was all bored. There was no real ailment that I was curing or no breakthrough that I was doing. So it all started being bored and ridiculous for me. And I needed more from all of it. I needed a real patient. And I went with this query to my father, who said that I was out of my mind to even think about that. He told me that his license could be seized for doing something like that, and even be imprisoned for it. And moreover, he said that I was not rational enough to operate a living human being, and that my knowledge to such things was very limited. I knew it wasn't true. Moreover, I knew I was better than him, and somehow he knew it. It was something that I really wanted, and there was no way going around, and there was no denying that fact. I had to give in to the urge of operating on a living man, and for that, I had to find a man who was suffering from something now. This would possibly something out of my hand, since anyone in the right mind would not really look forward to getting operated from a child, so I had to wait a while for it. I turned 15 and looked like I was 17 or 18, and I somehow knew that it was the right time to indulge in my urge to operate on someone living, and there was no way still a sane man would indulge in such. So I turned to the forgotten people and roamed the streets looking for a homeless man as my subject of my surgery, and searching for around a month, I finally found the best subject, a brain-dead man that was lying on the front porch of the RV of a family that were too poor to take care of that man, and I paid them $100 for the man, and then along with the one friend who I gave $100 for keeping their mouth shut, bribed him into helping me out. We brought him back to my lab in the garage where I operated on every animal. All my apparatus were ready and be used and sanitized. Then told my friend to get away from the lab and not tell anyone about anything that I was doing in there. I picked up the surgical knife and started operating on the man. I opened up his brain. There was no modern equipment that I had. I was working with the knives and scalpel and all that. I had no idea of the medical records of the man, and I was clueless about the diagnosis. But I knew from the moment I opened the brain, I have a very little time to figure out the problem with him. And I opened and looked and looked and looked for the tiniest of details and tiniest of patches that I can find in that brain. And then after about a minute, I found the cysts and tumors clogging up the motor functions of the man. The man wasn't brain dead. There was blockage in the motor functions. I read about it in my books. I operated on him and started operating and went on to operate on him for hours. It was a 4-hour surgery. It took me around 4 hours to do it completely and stitch him back up. He was sedated and hopefully stable, and I just waited for him. And then I realized my father was watching the surgery and never really disturbed me. And I remember he was pissed, and he was shouting at the top of his lungs, calling me reckless, fool, and wannabe. And then, as he was shouting, the man opened up his eyes. The guy was awake, and it was done. He was awake, and he saw that he could easily move now. My father looked at me with awe and said, "Do you see what you have done? That man knows everything. Do you even know that he can testify against us and this all could go away and stop?" I looked at him and said, "I just wanted to show you that I can do it. I am more capable than any surgeon." As I said it, I got back to the man, sedated him, opened him up, and then with just a snip, made him the brain-dead body he was earlier. I remember the horror in my father's eyes, as if he was trying to tell me, and he did. He said, "You might be a genius, but you are a sociopath." I smiled, because genius is the only thing I heard. I remember the craze for the new Avatar film. We were all packed and ready to leave for the special screening that the studios have done. I was a film critic, so mostly it was us that got to review it all first, and to be able to review the most anticipated film of the decade was quite an honor, and we were not going to miss that for anything. And we did go to the premiere, and to make sure we looked presentable, we wore our finest suits to it. It was the Chinese theater, and we were all introduced to the director, and before the film could start, they were getting stuff for us at our seats. It was the regular popcorn bucket and drinks and raisins, and I did catch a glimpse of the director, and he was standing right at the corner of the big screen, and he looked pretty wrecked, as if there was something going behind the scenes that we didn't know. This movie was everything that everyone was talking about, and we were being taken care of like we weren't just ordinary film critics. They wanted us to really like the movie, and they were making sure that we would get the full experience. They didn't want us to give any bad reviews, I guess, but there was no way that I would not write an honest review. I knew that I would write only the truth about the movie. The screening was already around half an hour late, and we were getting all impatient and tired sitting on the seats. I remember some of the guys were even leaving the theater, and the director was trying to get them all seated, but no one was really into it. The show started around 40 minutes late, and the seats were already empty, and by the time the film started, half the hall was empty, and I was still sitting there, and probably I was the only one who had the most following. So I was the one that did not really want to let go off, and I could see throughout the film that the director was staring at me at the intervals, trying to judge my reaction, to see if I am liking the film or not, and I was making sure to give him the fake looks. I did not want him to understand what is actually going on with me. There were moments that I was enjoying, and there were moments that I wasn't really into. And the fact that the film started so late, I was already tired sitting on those seats. And I remember all I wanted to do was sleep, but the director had his eyes on me, so I couldn't shut my eyes for mere seconds. I remember I was really fighting my urge to just sleep, and midway into the film, I wanted to lie down and take a real good nap. The film, as grandiose as it was, bored me, and before the screen could clear for an intermission, I remember falling asleep on my chair as it got harder to let my eyes stay open. And then I didn't imagine, and I fell asleep on the seat. I could hear the film going for a while, and everything was blurred, and I was almost asleep when everything went dark, and I guess I completely slept. I think I might have slept for the whole time because when I opened up my eyes, it was completely dark, and I thought that I have messed up and stayed asleep since the screen was black and there was no one there, and it felt like I was in trouble, and I was in no way entitled to review it completely. But then I saw it was the director. He came closer, and he looked at me for minutes. He just stared at me, and he kept staring at me. And then a few minutes later, he said, "How was the film?" He looked at me, and I tried to answer, and he did again. "Did you like the film?" And then I said, "Yeah, sure, I liked it." And then he asked around for a while, and then he said, "What was the last thing that happened in the film that you watched?" And I was just looking here and there, trying to figure out answers, and I realized that I didn't have any answer for it. And then later he came closer. "You're lying, aren't you? You didn't watch the movie." And I said, "I did, I watched it." And then he looked at me with stern look and said, "Okay then, review it. Review the movie right here." And I was so pissed, and at the same time, I was a bit scared about his obsession and asked, "Come on, please review it for me." And I decided, well, there was nothing he could really do. He might be crazy, but at the end, he is just a celebrity. So I started. The movie starts out well, and there are moments that piques your interest, and you want to see where the movie is going. You try to see the film and understand, but you don't. You go to the cinema for experience, and that is all you get. You witness something made really beautifully, but there is no character that you can hold on to. There's no emotion to the story, and it felt like I am watching a National Geographic film. But then that is it. An experience, and there is that emptiness that makes it incomplete. While it is brilliant, it is also a terrible film. That explains why I don't remember the moment I slept and missed the rest of it, because after consuming the awe and beauty of it, you will get bored and probably sleep. And then I stopped. I realized I've been too honest with him, and then I looked up and he was furious. And then, when I looked up, and I saw was pointing a gun at me and said, "Are you going to publish that? Your answer will be responsible for your next decision." And then I realized the situation I was in, and I decided to say that I will not publish. And then he gave me the script and said that this is what I have to run, and I did that. I wasn't going to mess around with that big of the industry professional. And that was when I had to give the false review of Avatar, a movie I never liked. If you have been to New Orleans, you know how culturally rich that town is, and how influential role food plays in the rich history of town. Town is the epicenter of the testament of any culture, although there is a very short period of time when the food of the area suffered a really bad name due to the actions of a man that is no way related to New Orleans food culture. It all began when this young social media guy who called himself an internet celebrity came barging into the Melita Diner and ordered the menu. The server greeted him. "How are you? And what would you like to have today?" The man, quick with enthusiasm, said, "I would like to order your whole menu, please." After preparing the big meal, in an hour and a half, they charged the bill and the guy refused to pay it, saying that he wants to get sponsored by them and instead will promote the diner in place of paying for all the food that he ordered. He said, "Look, I am a celebrity. I got 2 million subscribers on YouTube, and I can help you get this place boom up." To which the server said she would have to ask the owner, and to which the owner came, and he refused the offer, since the bill was around $699 worth of food. He said to the man, "Thank you for the offer, but I don't want the promotion." The man who ordered the meal said, "You sponsor me and you get the goods." The owner said, "No, we would like you to pay the bill like everyone else." The man was getting derailed and angry. "You could have just sponsored me and we would have gotten over everything. Now I am just going to make sure no one comes to your diner." As he said, the owner politely said, "Do what you feel. Just pay the bill and leave." Since the establishment refused to do so, and that pissed him off, and there was confrontation between the owners and him, until eventually he getting kicked out of the place. And that led to him making a video where he did accuse the place of being mean, unkind, and abusive to him, and that they tried to make him pay after calling him, and agreed about the sponsorship. And having the following he had, he made sure to convey the message loud and clear to the wide audience he had. He made the typical YouTube video and said, "Hey guys, I was recently assaulted at this little diner, Melita. I ordered the food at the diner, and they said that they would like to get a shout out, but as soon as I did, they also said that I should also pay the bill that they charged me extra, and they even added items that I did not order. Now I don't want to sound petty and obstruct their business, but if I was a sensible person, I wouldn't go their place." Sooner, the video reached the establishment, and the influence of that internet person was enough to affect the business. People believed the story of that phony celebrity, and the business started suffering. People were making up stories on how the staff was bad, and even to an extent tried vandalizing the place, and were constantly posting updates on social media, saying the place was really bad and rude. The regulars kept coming to the place, but that was it. Since the part of town was old, there were only few old-timers that truly knew how amazing that place was. But there weren't enough old-timers to testament the dignity of the place, and the place that stood strong for almost a century was now on verge of being closed because of a greedy guy. Alonzo was on the verge of closing the place up, the place that had been serving up the neighborhood for years, even though he did not want to. Not knowing what to do, a guy named Billy, who was an old regular, told Alonzo to meet up with Lady Danielle, and she can bring him the very solution that he needs. At first, he was skeptic of going to a shaman, but then Billy said that it worked wonders for everyone and he should give it a try. Alonzo was desperate and knew that it had to be done. His place was snatched away, and he needed to take down the guy who did it. It was then that Lady Danielle, along with Alonzo, who was the owner of the place, decided to put a curse on the guy. Now, Lady Danielle never put bad curse, but sometimes when she thinks someone has been unjust, she puts one. She decided to wait for the right time, and she found it during one of her lives. During one of the live feed of the mukbang, Lady Danielle and Alonzo, the owner of the diner, put a curse on him, and as he ate, they mimicked the food he ate with a voodoo doll, and instead of good food, they stuffed the doll with rotten insects and old dust and bones and disgusting things that cannot be comprehended. The premiere looked normal, and it was over. Alonzo, being a skeptic, did not think that the curse worked. It wasn't until a week later, when the news broke, that the mukbang creator died because of eating stale, greasy, and unhealthy food. His heart was blocked. But the one thing that was surprising was finding things that humans normally don't eat in his body. The contents of his stomach revealed that he ate cockroaches, rats, human feces, head of a crow, squirrel meat, though it is not known that he ever ate that or not. But these contents that were revealed are the same content that Lady Danielle and Alonzo fed the voodoo doll. Back in the 90s, I was working at this call center, and I was the manager in, and we had a lot of calls that came in every day. And our office was located right in the center of a hospital and coffin cellar. It was a small rental place, and we were selling pinky stocks to people. So our office wasn't really the high-end office like them stock exchanges, and it was a low-rent place and really weird place to have an office at, between a hospital and a coffin shop. I was the night shift manager, and I didn't like, but it paid better than the day shift and the staff was less, so it wasn't difficult to manage them all. Day shift was a pain in the ass to manage, and I wasn't ready for that. We had these small coffee breaks in the night where we would just sit outside the office and see the hospital all busy, and even the coffin shop would stay busy most of the times. People would walk across from the hospital to the coffin shop, and being there in the night shift, you would witness it all. It was weird that we did that, but it was very thought-levitating, and we all enjoyed deep conversation in those small coffee breaks of contemplation. Even the employees that worked the night might look weird to the outside world, but they were much deeper in their thinking than compared to the day shift staff, and I managed them both, and I liked the night staff much better. This one day, when there weren't people at the shift because of the flu, there was a flu going around and it hit the office. Most of the employees were down with it, and only a handful were able to attend the office. And we were keeping busy that night since there were a handful of us and a lot of phone calls to handle. The night was too busy, and it was all chaos in there. We were handling calls for our friends. It was a tight night, and we were squeezing in as much call time as we can to hit the night's target. We had to stay ahead from the day shift team. It was important. We were hitting the targets right and were ahead than the team, and we're making sure we kept the lead, and that is why we were working our best to do that. So after a continuous call answering and making the lead by working 4 hours straight without stopping, we arranged a break for everyone and ordered pizza and Coke, and decided to head out and eat by the tables outside the office, and it was a great one. Everyone deserved that. When we got out there, we saw that even the hospital was quiet today, and the coffin shop closed, and it was one of those calm nights that were full of sweet melancholy, and we relaxed and sat on the tables, all of us staring in the distance, just enjoying our pizza and Cokes. It was a great night. And then, a man approached us. He asked if we knew when the coffin shop will open. We had no idea, so we told him. But then the man still kept on walking towards the shop, and then we just walked right past the door, and we were all astonished. We thought that the shop was closed, and then around 10 minutes later, the man walked back from the shop and said to us, "When my son comes, you will know. Tell him that I want the blue marbled coffin." And the man just kept walking towards the hospital. We were just dazed with everything weird that was going on. And then around a half hour later, when we were able to get inside, a young man asked us, "Excuse me, is the coffin shop open yet?" And I said, "No, it is closed today. It will remain closed today." And the man looked disappointed. And just out of the feeling in my gut, I said, "Your father wanted the blue marbled coffin." And he stopped and asked me, "What?" And then I told him the story about a man who just walked in a few minutes earlier. Then the man said, "You must be mistaken. My father died this morning. You must have mistaken me for someone else." And then I don't know why I did, but I asked the man to show us the photograph of his father. And then he took out his phone and showed us, and we were stunned. It was in fact his father, and the man was shocked. How could we have all seen the same man? And then we realized it was the ghost of the dead man trying to convey the one final wish. I was a worker at a child care service, and there were different kinds of kids from all the walks of life just coming in through the system every day, and it wasn't something that everyone was very keen of seeing every day. There were kids from different backgrounds and different trauma mingling inside the system, and though it was not much to worry about the young kids, but the one above 10 who were much more hostile to the new environment, and they were put in, and the kids above the age were much more violent than anyone I have seen. Even though they shared the same trauma, it was difficult to get them to see eye to eye on things and the problems, and so they were often juggled from one institution to another, and were often in the system. And then they would end up 18 and struggling to keep the right ways in the society. My job was to make sure kids don't do that. So I struggled a lot, and then around a month later, I was transferred to the child division, and the one with kids less than 10 years. And I thought that maybe it is time that things get easy for me. Working with teenagers was very tiring, and keeping them out of the system was very tough. But with kids, I assumed things would be easy. I was not sure of how to handle the kids so tender of age, but I knew all I had to do was be very kind and loving to them, and it was really a bliss to work with them. And for 2 years, I really got into it and did my very best to help the kids and was able to really imprint an impact on their life and getting them places and with great families and most importantly, loving families. I was in 2 years of working with the kids, and I had now complete control over management and handling of kids, and rarely a kid escaped the system as a danger. Everyone got out rehabilitated and safe. I remember the day. It is still very fresh in my memory. Mr. Roger, the doctor, called in a call of a kid that was found sitting around his murdered parents. He was an 8-year-old boy who had the injuries but was spared and was found crying and sitting by the bodies of his parents. The boy was said to be in trauma and was not speaking to anyone. When the boy came into the institution, I looked at him, and I remembered him staring right back at me, and he was such staring and such coldness that I cannot even tell you about how he looked. I was in the horror of him staring into my soul, and when he walked past me, I remember there was a scene of chill that I felt. I am not the guy to make such snide comments, but there was something sinister about him. I was too guilty that I was judging him, but there was something that just did not sit right with me. I still to this day regret that I judged the kid too much, but I also in subconscious agreed with it all. The kid came in and was silent for hours, even after trying to find out more information about him. There was nothing he would say. He just drank the water he was given or eat the food he was given. He never asked for anything else other than that, and never said a word about anything. The counseling sessions were filled with silence, and the therapy sessions were filled with great silence, and the kid said nothing and asked for nothing in the coming weeks. But then when the new therapist stepped in, she was fair and just the right amount of heavy, and she had the sessions with the boy. And then it was then that the boy first cracked and he started talking to her. She resembled a lot to him like his mother, and it was easier for him to open up. And then he told her the story, which she later told me. The boy said to her, "There is this voice that I feel I can hear, but I don't really hear it. And it compels me, and it tells me to do everything. To skin away the squirrels I feed, to kill Miss Parker's dog, and to even throw stones at the elderly couple in the neighborhood. I try to silence it, but it is more powerful than I can imagine. Can you please hold me close? I have never known what it feels like to be held closely to a woman's heart. And I think that touch can really make it go these voices silent." But she didn't. She knew it wasn't the right thing to do. I saw the file, and the boy was labeled sociopath. And when noticed, he did show and portrayed the qualities of one. And he was opening up to the new therapist I suggested. And he was telling about all the things that he had done and how he wants everything to just stop. The therapist told me he has not been loved as a child. His parents were probably negligent of the kid, and that has made him distant. He doesn't know the touch of the skin of another human, and I would want to try this method, hoping that he would finally open up about the feelings. She decided to take her approach, and in the next session, she got in the room with the boy and held him close and breastfed him, hoping that the skin touch was something that would make him open up. And as he held the woman tight and sucked her breasts, he took the piece of mirror he was hiding and consecutively stabbed her in her bare breasts and continuously kept stabbing her and calling her out and stabbed until she was lifeless. She never realized what came upon him. He reacted, but the not way she was thinking. And as he did, everything was being recorded in the cameras, and we were in shock trying to get to the room. And when we reached that, what we saw haunted us for the rest of our lives. The new therapist was top naked, and the boy was sucking the bloodied nipple and pressing the stabbed mirror through his hand, trying the best to cut himself slowly. It was the creepiest incident that have happened there, or probably the most sinister anywhere in the world to think that an 8-year-old boy would be capable of such weird, sinister acts. While I was in the 7th grade, going from my school in the downtown area of my city to my house, the buses usually are composed of a certain constant demographic. The teenagers coming back from school, the working class adults and single mothers with their children trying to save a buck by using the bus. In addition to this demographic, there are the two types of disturbances: drug addicts or alcoholics that are loud and disruptive.
usually begging for $1 in the middle-aged man, or her predator preying on middle schoolers or young women, both of which I have had my own encounters with. But today's story is not my own experience. I did have a front row seat this crazy encounter though. Now that we have the exposition, on to the story. I find a seat near the end of the bus by myself. Because of the way the buses work, there's one row on each side of the bus, with each seat has 2 sitting spaces. But there's also a twisty area in the middle of the bus. 2 seats are directly across from each other in this area. On the opposite side of me is a working class man, some teenagers behind me, and in front of me are the main characters of the story, a dingy, unshaven man and 3 teenage girls. The man being directly in front of me and the girls in the twisty seats in front of the man. Being that there's only 2 per seat, one of the girls decided to sit on one of her friend's laps to stay close and not have to sit beside a stranger. Upon seeing this, the man begins to sort of creepily laugh to himself before obnoxiously adjusting the way he's sitting in a suggestive manner, rubbing his thighs and staring the girl down. As the ride begins and the girl notices him, he starts to pat his thighs if to suggest she sit down there, then leading to verbalize these actions, saying things like, "Come here, girl. Come sit here instead. You belong right here." Everyone inside of this disgusting behavior catches on, and they're all watching him. The girl simply scouted the man and turns away, her friends throwing light insults at him. He attempts in vain. He turns to the working class man who's watching what's going on. He then says something along the lines of, "Why is she sitting there? She needs to be on my lap instead." Further commenting on his high schooler's body and doing the buddy-buddy arm nudge with him as if the two were pals. Just a note, she is visibly a high schooler. Our district requires standard school attire, so she has khaki shorts and button-up short-sleeved shirt with a backpack, so there's no way that this man couldn't have known that she was underage. But I digress. Anyways, hearing these outrageous statements for the man, the working class man replies with something like, "Hey, don't you ever associate with me. Whatever you think this is a child you're talking about. I come from Detroit, and we put people like you in the dirt." The man not at all deterred scoffs and does his hand-flinging motion as if to blow him off. The working class man stops his coming up, and as he stands, he tells the girl that he apologizes for what she's going through and leaves. The girl tells him on his way out, "Thank you, but I'll be able to handle it. Just kind of wait." The gross man turns back there and says, "Handle what? Handle what? Me?" and laughs to himself. I was appalled at this gross statement, but even angrier than me were the adults and male thugs who started standing in the area where the situation was, witness to this atrocity. I remember hearing the gang members all start to get riled up behind me in defense of the girl. Now this guy starts to get a bit scared. He's now stopped talking upon seeing how many people are against him. The girl again goes on to assure the crowd that she's got everything under control, and things calm down a bit. This until he pulls the string to notify the driver that he wants to leave at the next stop. In a split second, everyone's eyes were back on him. The thugs begin standing up, lingering near the doors just in case he plans to run. The bus begins to arrive to the stop, and as the man stands up, so does the girl. He attempts to walk past her, but upon approaching her, she pushes him back not to get him off his feet, but they just get back him from the forming group of people. She does this because as he stumbles backward like Django, she swings her belt off her waist and yells, "He likes to prey on little girls. He likes flirting with little girls as a grown man," and starts beating the brakes off the sky with it. And yes, she was using the metal side. My ears filled with the clinking of metal on his body and head, the slapping of the leather on the skin, and the moans and cries of this fall. The grown man who is now on the ground in tears attempting to escape from this well-deserved beating. The bus ends up completely stomping the driver, running back to separate the two. The girl is still beating the man with all her might as the bus driver rushes over to pick her up and pull her away from the man. The man ends up crawling hands and knees off the bus, where he then laid on the concrete moaning and crying in pain. Everyone was escorted off the bus, and the police were soon called to get the man medical attention. And the police ended up detaining the girl, and I couldn't find any information about her charges. But I hope wherever she is, she's having a good day. As for the man, all I can say is just don't be a creep, and bad things won't happen to you. I admire that girl's bravery and the passengers that bonded together for the safety of the girl with the best demonstration of what a community should be that I've ever seen.
I am the manager at the KFC in Slovakia. It is one of the lesser-known places, and since chicken is universally loved by most, KFC decided to open up a shop in Slovakia. Most of the chicken was imported, and there was this sweet texture to it. Most of the raw material used in making was the standard material like every other KFC, and similar spices were used to make the KFC. Our place was a bit off the city, but was mostly packed during the day, and then in the night, like everything, it used to become the darker image of itself. The KFC had given us few liberties to create new recipes, since the Eastern European taste was pretty different, and the chicken didn't do much to the taste of Eastern European people. So we had the liberty of trying different things and different meals to suit for the local people. Even though it was called Kentucky Fried Chicken, our owner did not want us to limit the store with just chicken. So we used everything, and people loved it. Whatever the inspection people came, we just bribed them. It was easy to deal with when the inspection team was from Slovakia itself. It would be easy for us to just explain why we would do this, and they would understand. And I think even though we were the first to do it, there were so many KFCs in Slovakia that they were adopting our methods because our methods generated more revenue than the others did. So everyone in Slovakia were cool about it. Us, the inspecting managers, our owner, and the people who were eating it. Then one day we heard the news that one of the inspecting team from KFC in the United States of America will be coming to inspect us. And moreover, they are planning on branching out further into the Slavic countries, and they wanted to start out the research from our place, since we were the highest revenue generating KFC in the region. We were informed that they will be arriving on the Monday, so the following Sunday, we had all our surprise of the different meats we were using to make the fried chicken. Even though we called it chicken, we rarely fried chicken there. We just used the alphabet of the meat we were serving so people would know. So if it said KFC Bucket D, that meant it was fried deer and not chicken. And we did that with a variety of meat because chicken was the least favorite of the people, and belonged to such cold place chicken was really more like under meal. The following Sunday, we cleared out everything and changed the menu, and got rid of anything that made us unusual than other KFCs. They came the following Monday and introduced themselves. They were wearing their corporate suits and looked as straight as they can be, and started inspecting the place carefully. They were looking at things that making sure that all of them were according to the US KFC standard, which I personally thought was stupid. Knowing what taste Slovakian people like, it was pretty sure that KFC would not even sell a single piece here if it was just the chicken. And they were measuring things and pointing out the slightest of blunders, if they were in the photos that were displayed, or how the furniture was assembled, or how the things were visible in the kitchen in distance. We were just trying to not let them enter the kitchen. They were seated, and they ordered the chicken, and as we served them, they really liked it. It was the bland KFC chicken, and they liked it. Mostly because it was similar to the very chicken served through different KFCs. One of them must have realized something. He said, "This smells different, almost as if there was a residue or something else, something with more flavor here." That guy was good, and he was definitely the one we did not want in our kitchen to be. He stopped eating and said, "I would like to take a look into the kitchen and see the process. I want to see how your employees make the chicken here. I want to find the flavor of that residue meat on the chicken. Take me to the kitchen." As we went inside the kitchen, he started observing our workers working and making the chicken in there and started snooping around. I asked him, "What are you looking for, sir?" And then he said, "There is something fragrant in this kitchen. It is definitely not chicken, and I know it, because I know what kind of meat smells like. So are you going to tell me what you were doing here, or will I have to try to figure it out on my own? I was confused with everything that was going on, and there was nothing much I can say, and I started stammering, and he must have caught the lie. He took the hand off one of the workers, tool off the gloves, and started licking her fingers and said, "See? Told you to stink smell. Something else." He continued, "You tell me what it is, or I inform my supervisors that you are just not simply making chicken, but so much more, and I will make sure that you all get shit for breaking the KFC contract." And in that state of panic, I punched him right in the face, and he was out cold. The kitchen staff looked at me as nothing happened, and they picked him up, taped his mouth, and moved him to the cold storage where he stored all the meat. And just then, the other guy came in and said, "They are hiding something their accounts don't match. They are hiding cash." And in all that, as he raised his head out from the book he was holding, he saw us putting his partner in the cold storage. And in that moment, one of our kitchen guys went up behind and grabbed him. We later helped and taped this guy up too and put them both in the fridge. Today it has been a month since the incident, and they are still in the fridge, frozen with their eyes wide open with all the meat. Maybe we might turn them into our menu. We're not sure about that at the moment. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. I worked in the complimentary breakfast area for about a year. Our job was to basically just stand around the food and answer any dietary questions guests had. We were also supposed to talk to the guests, get to know them, and make them feel at home. That day, there was a firefighters convention downtown in our city. The restaurant was full of them. They were all super nice, but there was one who was a little different. He was about 6'4". I'm thinking about 300 pounds, but it was all muscle. He was one of the biggest people I've ever seen in person. He walked down with a friend, and I greeted them. He said hello with an extremely deep voice. In fact, it startled me. I jumped in. He said, "Oh, did I scare you?" I said, laughing. "I honestly just wasn't expecting your voice to be that deep." He chuckled. He went on to look around the food area. He reached for something and spilled some cereal. He looked back and apologized, asking if I was going to get him for making a mess. I jokingly said, "We're really serious around here, so you better clean it up before we charge you for damages." He laughed. He got his food and then came over to talk. Here's how the conversation went. "You're pretty funny, you know. I'm usually not this friendly in the morning, so you caught me on a good day. Let me ask, how old are you?" That dreaded question that clearly indicates where the conversation is going. "I'm 21. "Great. The reason I ask is because a couple of buddies and I are having a party down at insert expensive boutique hotel, and I was wondering if you wanted to come through. You can bring a couple of girlfriends." "Actually, I can't. I'm going out of the country in a few days and I haven't packed yet." Which was true, but I would have said no anyway. "Oh, I love traveling. Where are you going?" "I'm going to Ireland, Spain, Italy." "That's amazing. I went to Argentina. It was beautiful." "You know, since we both love to travel, we should be travel buddies." Now, I was thinking strange phrasing, but maybe he just meant we'll both continue to travel, but separately. I don't know. I love giving the benefit of the doubt to people who don't deserve it. "Yeah, sure." He then reaches out his hand for a handshake. "Promise?" I hesitantly shake his head. "Yep, I promise I will continue traveling." This whole time has been very jokey and lighthearted, but suddenly his demeanor changed. He sat down his plate and started frowning. "Listen, you're going to give me your phone number and you're going to keep your promise. Don't tell me no." He got closer. Pinning me between himself and the counter, he talks quieter. "And if you're thinking about it, you better have a good excuse." My anxiety was on 10. Thankfully, I happened to be by the exit door. I slid from between him and the counter and said on my way out, I'll have a great excuse," and ran to the kitchen and never came back. After a lot of struggle, I was about to start my own business, a home furnishing business. We would go to our clients and furnish their houses in very stylish and aesthetically pleasing way. And the best bit about us was that we were economical and luxurious, however the client pleased. We were pretty certain that our business was in the right shape, and were definitely certain about achieving our quarterly goals. The main focus of our business was to make a client list that could put us onto the map of influential people and earn ourselves a position. As we completely shifted our focus to relationship building and client management, we tend to get more and more outwardly and active in our professional pursuits. One day during the promotional discount week, we got a call from the Douglas Mansion. Now, if you don't know the Douglas Mansion, let me put it this way. If you are in the Douglas Mansion, you are one of the most important people in the city. That was the call that had the potential to not just put us on a map in the city, but the whole country. So we asked, and it was the old Mr. Douglas himself. And he asked, "So yes, you can clean and furnish things in my room, can you?" And I replied, "Yes, sir, we do." To which he said, "You will do it spick clean." And then I said, "Yes, sir. Cleaner than any cleanest spot in your mansion right now." Mr. Douglas said jokingly, "Well, I hope you do. It is a mess in here. And yes, you do have to sign NDA and some documents. We will hold you liable if anything is lost." At first I hesitated, but then it was the big break we surely could have used, and I agreed to his terms. It was pretty sure that once I entered the house, my business will definitely take off amongst the likes of these multi-billionaires, and I was in no way ready to let this one opportunity go away. So instead of sending off my usual people, I myself took charge and made a team of the other two people who originally started this business with me, and we went to the mansion the very next day. Upon entering and parking our car in the big driveway, and before entering the house through the big door in front, a guard came with a bunch of NDA and contractual papers. He gave us the envelope, but told us to sign the NDA before entering. Knowing this to be the opportunity of lifetime, we were ready to sign them. The worst scenario that we had in our mind was of a sexual dungeon that we just might discover in the basement. As we enter, we are greeted at the staircase with Mr. Douglas, the owner of the mansion. He asked us if we had signed the NDA or not, and upon telling him that we have, he decided to tell us a short story as we started walking up the stairs. My son returned later last night. He was a bit intoxicated and he came up to my room. He decided to indulge a bit of intervention with his dear old dad. I was in my bed in the sheets, and he came closer and told me that he had ideas to make the company better, and I told him that we will talk business in the morning, but he was quite adamant about telling me now. So he took his gun and then pointed me. Definitely some kind of distrust thing going on with kids and parents. But Emily, her girlfriend, who was sleeping with me and was behind the curtains at the time, came in and smashed the ashtray on his head. He turned in pain and shot her 3 times. We gave a little smirk, thinking maybe billionaires have twisted humor. He stopped in his tracks and then opened up a room near the balcony. And as we entered, we were blank in shock. His son was lying on the bed with the bandages around his head, while the family doctor stood there checking his vitals as if he was unhinged by the room. Mr. Douglas continued, "Yeah, so she died, and he made it. It wasn't that rough on him, but he did stupidly shoot the poor girl. She was going in bed, I must tell you that. Very good, these young ones." I was in total shock, and I couldn't shake myself back to the present. And as I tried my best to compose myself, "Well, you did sign the NDA, so in case you want to go and try tell this to people, you will be legally held for this, and by the looks of you, you definitely will not be able to pay me $10 million. So it is better that you get back to work, and I will put in a good name for you with my friends. And do look in the envelope, it is pretty sweet." We just witnessed a murder confession, and we did try to mumble our way out, but we had no choice. Me and the other 3 partners gathered together, and we realized that there is no way out because of the NDA. So the only reasonable thing at the moment was to do that. We did refuse him the service, but his crazy-looking security guards were very stern and definitely looked as if they would kill us. We were scared, confused, and very much in a moral conflict. We decided to open up the envelope, and there it was. The number of zeros in the envelope made us forget about the moral conflict. There was a spark in the eyes, and as we were busy thinking how to go through with it, some of the security guys dragged a fridge inside and told us to dispose the body in the fridge. And then they just walked away. Seeing the doctor was out and the guards too, I decided to take the photographs of the crime scene just in case it is ever needed in future, not to forget the moral conflict that seemed to have gone with the money was actually there building within. I store the photographs in the cloud, just in case they tried to go through my phone once we were done. We arranged everything and made the room cleaner than it ever was. The blood-soaked carpet was completely spick, with no sign of visible spot anywhere. They were rearranged and replaced with a place smelt like lavender and rose instead of death. Mr. Douglas was happy with our job, as the doctor guided the guards to take the body to the basement. Turns out the doctor will then use the organs and black market, and this was not the first time that they have done it. And I wondered about the countless victims that might have not gotten justice. But then my darker side of greed did take over, and I ended up helping him completely rid that room of any signs of violence, and even made it much more beautiful than he was. And that is how the visit started. It was Mr. Douglas at first, and then it started happening with all his rich friends too. Ancelotti, the Silverbergs, Weinsteins. We were all busy cleaning up their messes and were making really good money. In the next 5 years, we did build our business to top, but it all worked in the shadows, cleaning the filth of the richest scum on the planet. I waited for 5 years, through and through, going through this moral hell. Finally, with enough money to bail me out from the NDA, I went to see a lawyer. I told him about everything that happened with us through those 5 years and explained to him about things we went through. He looked at me and said, "It is a little too late for you to be morally woke now. You tell the police, they will put you behind for a long time. You have been an accessory and accomplice in the murders. So if you are ready to risk yourself to go to prison, then yeah, we can proceed." A dark, silent chill went across my spine, making me wonder and making me question my own morality. And as I stood there asking myself, am I willing to risk my own freedom? I received a call. It was Mr. Douglas. "Hey, send your boys, will you? I think my son made a mess again." I hung up and looked out the window. As the sun was going down, I had to make a choice, and so I did. As we entered the Douglas mansion, we saw that Mr. Douglas had killed his son. It all started when we moved out of our old house. We were not really keen on moving at first place, but we didn't have much option but to do so. We rented out a place in Florence, and we were the only English people in the town, so the cultural differences seemed to be pretty inflated by the time we set ourselves in the new rental place. Our stay was only for a month, and then we were headed back to London. We had no idea where everything in this new place was and where we can get stuff from, so we decided to cruise around the town in our bikes, and as we did, I met Malcolm. Malcolm was my first friend that I made in that place, and my only friend. He was also on his bike the first day he met me, and he took me to the local market and helped me shop easily. And then on the way back, we saw this really cool house that was all done for and broken. And then Malcolm told me that this house is off limits. No one enters or exits the house, and that it was breeding house of pure evil. I found that amusing. 21st century, and then there were these people who believed in ghosts, and I assumed, but Malcolm was very persistent of the stories that he had heard, and said that he would not dare and be that rebellious. And that was enough to pique my curiosity about that house. Every day we would ride past the house, and I would just look into and observe the ways to get into the house. And at the moment, I used to get highly obsessed with finding the answers for the stuff and would do everything possible to get the curiosity at peace. I told Malcolm about my plan to get into the house and investigate. He called me crazy, refused to help me, snitched it to my parents, and stopped talking to me. The town was really scared of the house, and for some reason, my parents were too, and they grounded me. But me being me, I knew I could not be stopped. One night I got out of the window, took my bike, and went to look it for myself and see for myself the horror everyone described. I got inside the house. It was dark, and it seemed scary at first. There were not much movements that can be detected, and everything seems untouchable. Apparently, stories involved a clown like Pennywise haunting the house and was linked to the deaths of all the missing children that walked into the house and were found face down in the quarry next morning, so everyone was scared. I knew the story, but I wasn't scared. I was intrigued. As I walked through the house, I found that there was nothing out of context and scary. As I walked with the torch in my hand and bag on my shoulder, a glove hand grabbed me. And as the hand grabbed me, my instinct kicked in and I turned off the flashlight. And as I did, I made sure to grip it tight and keep my hands free. I managed to open my mouth and give a fierce bite to his finger. He was down and in pain, and I kept biting as he shrieked. That shriek was as human as one gets, and as he dropped me, I get myself in balance and then looked at him with the flashlight. It was a creepy man in a mask. I turned off the flashlight and hit him hard across his face. He was down screaming in pain and also angry at the same time. I made a run for the door, but it was closed. I looked for the ways through flashlight and then switched it off. I was using it on a needed basis and finding out ways. I slid through the hall, and as I did, I knew he was following me. I turned on the flashlight and he tried to block the light hitting his eyes, and then I took a picture of him. I ran upstairs and quickly messaged the picture to my dad and 5 others in my phone, with this in the message: "Haunted house, creepy man, I am being attacked." I kept myself hidden in a room where he cannot find me, and I was listening to his steps approaching towards the room. It was dark and not easy to just walk around, but for him, it was easy. 5 minutes in, I felt he was approaching me, and he finally grabbed me, took the flashlight off my hands, and as I was trying to hit him, he started dragging me towards a room and opened a door that seemed to open towards the basement. But then sirens wailing on, he knew it was over. He left me there, punched me real hard, and started running down the basement saying that he will be back for me. As the police barged in, I directed them to the basement, and the man was caught an hour later. I was in trouble. The police, parents, Malcolm, and the whole town seemed to be angry with me, until the next day when I was lauded a hero when I exposed the creep pedophile shut-in who lured kids inside his house and then molested them and murdered them and threw them in the quarry that had the underground way from his basement. And that was the first time that I covered the story on my own in a local newspaper, from the local newspaper to New York Times crime unit. My adventures have just started. So this is actually my friend's story, but since she's not a subscriber and has zero desire to write this out, I'm telling it for her with full permission. A few years back, she matched with a guy on Bumble, and the two of them really hit it off. She said they were flirting back and forth for quite a while, and it got increasingly hot and heavy, until they were basically saying some pretty lewd things back and forth over text messages. According to her, she was super into it. He was kind of aggressive about it, but in a really hot way, like he seemed to know exactly what to say at any given moment. He's real confident, real cute, so they're soon arranging to meet up for a first date. Only the thing is, when she actually meets the guy, he seems super shy. Like the total opposite of what she was expecting, given the way in which the pair had been talking. That's not a huge red flag. I mean, I guess he could have been kinda shy about it. Some people talk a big game, and when it's a lot to live up to, besides, my friend is feeling the exact same way. So she just powers through and gets started with some regular sort of conversation. Over the course of the next hour or so, the pair of them loosen up, and the guy turns out to be just as charming and sociable as she'd hoped, and they're under the same music, and they focus on that. Then they start discussing axes and stuff, at which point the conversation takes a distinctly flirty turn. My friend then sees an opportunity to reference one of the things he'd said while they were texting back and forth. Nothing too forward, just kind of a hint at something according to her anyway. But as soon as she does, the guy turns super shy again with a face like a Cardinals jersey. He says, "I have to admit something. The person you were talking to on Bumble was my mom. I'm not too good at dating stuff, so she handles it for me." She thought he might have been joking at first, like he had to be joking, right? Nope. Deadly serious. He had literally no idea what he had said, not a clue. My friend had been texting back and forth flirtatiously with this guy's mother. Then she just passed on the time and placed their date without giving him so much as a hint of what to expect. My friend said she felt the blood literally draining from her face as he said it, as she felt a woozy like she might puke. It was so bad that he started saying stuff like, "Are you okay? Did I say something wrong? Dude, did you say something wrong? Are you kidding me?" I can't even imagine what she went through. My friend told the guy she was going to the bathroom, and then she made a beeline for the exit or wherever they were. She said the whole way back to her apartment, she was just numb and burst into tears as soon as she was walking through the front door. The first I heard of it was when she called me a couple of hours later, still in floods of tears, and I literally couldn't believe my ears at first. The whole episode was without a doubt the creepiest and cringiest thing I'd ever heard. And I thank God that it didn't happen to me. To think that there's actual mothers and sons out there with that skin-crawling, sickening kind of Norman Bates relationship. Kraus. I guess she's lucky he was good enough to be honest about it. And another universe. The guy is super malicious and sinister about it. And she ends up being a skin suit by the end of the month. I never thought that I'd have anything to post on the subreddit. But here we go. This literally just happened. So I had to try to keep this as short and as organized as possible. My 29-year-old female and my partner is a 23-year-old female. We were back in her own town visiting her family for about a week. It's a very small, isolated town in the middle of nowhere, and basically in the middle of the woods. While we were here, she wanted to meet up with an old high school friend who still lives in the area. We'll call him Kyle. So we meet Kyle at the beach, and right away he's acting super weird, making jokes about a three-way with us and just making a bunch of just unwelcome, gross comments. Obviously, we're unfortunately used to this stuff to a certain extent, but coming from someone who is supposed to be her good friend, it was extra annoying. So my girlfriend and I are shooting each other panicked looks the whole time. Once he's out of earshot for a second, she says that she's sorry, that he's never been like this before, and we can make an excuse to leave. When he comes back, we tell him we want to get dinner at a local bar, but he just asked to join us. We felt awkward, so we end up saying yes. He says he doesn't know quite how to get there, so he follows us. We get their order drinks and food, then head out to the patio with the drinks. He makes a few more gross comments, but it's generally been way more cool and normal than he was at the beach. We're smoking some weed on the patio and chilling. The food comes quick, and we finish it quicker. Now, here's where it gets really messed up. So halfway through my first drink, I'm feeling really tired, which makes sense, as we've had a long day. I give my girlfriend the signal that I want to go. She makes an excuse that we need to go. He keeps trying to get us to come to his house. I've got some good weed and dives there, and you can meet my cats, blah, blah, blah.
He's being really pushy. We keep saying no and making excuses. We need to check on her grandpa, etc. So finally we get in the car and say goodnight. We park next to each other and walk up and into the cars together while saying our goodbyes. And we get into the car. My girlfriend informs me that she wants to stay at the bar, but fake it like we're leaving because she doesn't want to chill with them anymore, understandably. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him to leave first, when he signals for us to roll down the window. We do. He says GPS has been kind of funny, and we can lead him to the main road. To be fair, we're in the middle of nowhere, so this didn't seem too outlandish. So obviously, staying behind at the bar was out of the question. So in the car, we were talking about how pushy was being, and she admitted she feels weird driving right back to her grandpa's house. So we should drive into town until we lose him. He's behind this for a long time, even way after he should have gotten off on his exit. We think it's weird, but we weren't sure what to do. So finally, we get on a 2-lane road, and he pulls up next to us and he's waving a phone, which is clearly my girlfriend's phone, in the window. We pull over, he gives her the phone back, chats for just a few seconds, then leaves in a hurry. Here's the part that makes my skin crawl. We know we had her phone. I saw her put it in her fanny pack, which was on the table, along with my phone and her bud. A few minutes before we left the bar, as we were preparing to leave, she didn't take it back out. There's literally no way she could have left at the bar. More importantly, he got in his car and left the bar at the same time as us, meaning he had to have already had the phone when we were leaving. It's not like we left the bars first and he saw it left on the table or something. He literally handled it and walked into the cars with us and calmly said goodnight with the phone already in his possession. Now, the kicker, apparently unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend had tasted a very weird bitter taste in her straw at the bar and was already suspicious, especially with how he's been acting. This is why she wanted to stay back at the bar, to get away from him and stay in public where she felt it was safer. So when he walked up to the car to return her cell phone, she very casually and deliberately flashed the knife that she kept for protection in her jacket. I didn't know at the time that she had done this. So that's why he had left so quickly. Obviously, I was annoyed with her for not telling me her suspicions sooner, but she just didn't want me to panic. I'm really shaken up. A few things are clear. 1, he stole my girlfriend's phone. And it seems like he did so that he would be forced to pull over on a dark road in the middle of nowhere till he quickly ended the conversation and left when my girlfriend flashed her knife. They'd been good friends for almost 10 years. If he wasn't planning on doing something malicious, I feel like he would have acted confused about the knife or said something like, "What's up? Why would you flash a knife at me? Is this as some sort of bad movie or something?" But instead, he just booked it. Which tells me he knew exactly what she was doing, reacting to a threat and preparing to protect herself and me. And 3, he probably spiked our drinks. My girlfriend noticed a weird taste in her straw right away and chose not to finish her drink. I finished half my drink, and I felt relatively tired. A few more things. I just don't know how he managed to nab the phone without us noticing, or knowing it doesn't really make any sense. But he did. Me and my girlfriend both remember her putting it in her fanny pack perfectly. We almost had no idea how he could have spiked our drinks unless he was working with the bartender. But we were the ones who suggested that bar. I don't know exactly how he did it, but I think I know why. And for that reason, my girlfriend's now ex-friend, who made creepy comments, probably tried to drug us and stole her phone in order to get us alone the dark road. Please keep your distance.
The secret of mine is that I've always wanted to SAS a customer as you read online. You know, the kind where a person asks to see the manager and the staff member does a flamboyant 180-degree spin and says, "That's me." I got to live that dream. Although that being said, I think it's nearly got me quite badly hurt too. A few years back, a customer had come into our branch of Starbucks an hour or so earlier and booked a table for his girlfriend and himself, and left some table decor he wanted to set the table up with. It seemed a little weird, but nevertheless, I offered to set up roses, LED candles, and cloth napkins for them so they could leave to get ready. I finished setting up the table when in walks Mr. Businessman. The store is basically empty at this point. It's 4:30 in the afternoon, too early for any sort of dinner rush, and so there are lots of tables free. Mr. Businessman walks up and asks to use the table clearly set up for a romantic night. I politely said it's been reserved, but there are many other tables he can take a seat at, but insists that he has that table. I take him to the table directly next to it and say this table is free, but he doesn't want that seat. He wants the reserved seat. He starts to raise his voice, and at that point, I can see he is choosing to be difficult for no other reason but to be difficult. I repeat myself, that table is reserved, and that's when he says it. He asks to see the manager. I feel the moment it spread through my whole body, starting from my suddenly beaming smile all the way to my fingertips and overworked feet. I feel the power I suddenly possess flow over me. This is it. This is my moment. I look around, then down at my name badge and gasp as it says manager under my name. I smile and say, "That's me, sir. I'm the manager." I was being awful and petty, and he's beyond angry at this point and raises his finger, stabbing the air around me and says, "What's your name? I'll be reporting you to head office." And that was honestly the least of my worries. Like, for a little while, I legitimately thought this guy was going to hurt me was honestly worth it. To make this guy so angry, this absolute psycho, to pay for my witty little comment with my health or life. I think I got very lucky because he leaves in an angry huff and says he'll be taking his business elsewhere. He ended up returning an hour later, and there's now a regular in our store. He greets me by my name every time he comes in. I've been hugely into online gaming for as long as I can remember. As many others might testify, beating your friends on split-screen Mario Kart was fun, but beating some faceless stranger on Age of Empires 2 has a legit rush. Like, I always imagined it was some super smart older kid and getting their butt handed to them by me, the 10-year-old tactical genius, and the whole thing kicked off a love affair with online games that stayed strong ever since. But the past 8 years or so, my game of choice has been Counter-Strike Global Offense. Being a sweaty FPS veteran, I played the first game a whole bunch and was super excited to get to grips with its successor. When I got my hands on it, I was hooked, and over the years, I moved from clan to clan, playing with an ever-shifting international group of people until I settled on the clan. And now it's run by his husband and a wife pair in their 40s, and they generally keep the whole operation running smoothly and drama-free, hence why it's been my steady clan for the past couple of years. I say generally because there was one quite significant incident involving another clan member that had a significantly negative impact on my life. So there's this one particular girl that I used to play with quite regularly who had the username K9 Disclaimer. Not her exact username. I just don't want her to hear me telling about the story so she can't find me again. At first, Kay actually seemed really cool, and judging from her profile picture, pretty cute too. She was exactly the kind of girl I'd been crushing on back before I was married. But since I was with Lena, all that kind of stuff was totally off the cards, and the relationship we had was entirely platonic. My whole life was going swimmingly for a while, and I was very happy. Right up until my wife decided that she wasn't so happy, and that she was going to file for divorce. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had no idea she was so unhappy with our marriage, and as much as she insisted it wasn't me, that she had her own issues going on, I still blame myself. Add on to that the fact that she would be seeking full custody of our 3-year-old daughter. I was broken. I sank into the pit of drinking and stayed up super late, losing myself in single-player stuff because I just couldn't face interacting with people. I did make an effort to keep the clan updated, like I didn't want them thinking that I died or ghosted or whatever. So I told them about the divorce and how I wasn't feeling so hot. They were super supportive, and I'll always remember that, and they had the presence of mind give me the time and space that I needed to get myself together again. All but one canine, like I said, K, was just my type, and I know that there was a slight chemistry between us, but in the aftermath of getting such horrible news, I was in no mood to contemplate dating again, and I knew I wouldn't be getting back on that horse anytime soon. But Kay didn't see it that way. Apparently, and over the following weeks, showed herself to be anything but the friend that I needed right now, as she once put it. It started off all innocent, getting my real name off a mutual friend so she could wish me well on Facebook. It was an unexpected intrusion, but not entirely unwelcome one. She was worried. I got that. So I let her know I was in a bad place, but then I was dealing with it. The conversation was amicable. She sent me a friend request that I had no problem accepting. Then, that was that. Or so I thought anyway. What started as a few gentle inquiries quickly turned into something totally overwhelming. After a week or so of getting messages from K9, the tone had gone from kind and understanding to weirdly accusatory. A perfect example of this is when she messaged me something like, "I want to hear more from you," or "hear from you is only making me feel worse. Need to understand that your actions have an effect on those around you." Now, this is like one of the lowest points of my life, and she's sending me messages like that. It didn't just make a depressing situation all the more draining. It actually turned a switch in me, and I started to feel anxious and angry towards her. This is about the time I just started ducking her messages entirely. I didn't need that kind of drama in my life. I had enough on my plate as it was. The next escalation came when my soon-to-be ex-wife called one morning, presumably to talk about some depressingly tedious aspect of her upcoming divorce. Only, it wasn't the divorce that had prompted her call. It was something else entirely. She started off the call by asking who in God's name is insert K9's real name, and she sounded livid. I remember just sitting there in shocked silence for a moment, neurons firing my brain as I pieced all together in a matter of seconds. Except, in K9's friend request meant that she had access to every one of my Facebook contacts, a type of privacy I never really thought of previously, which obviously included all of my close friends and family along with my soon-to-be ex-wife. I tried to explain that Kay was someone I played CSGO with and some innocent explanation, but I knew what was happening. Kay had obviously been in touch with my wife, and whatever message she'd sent, it definitely not been friendly. But far from being friendly, Kay's messages have been downright abusive, and from my wife described, straight up threatening in several places. She said she'd be in touch with the police to file a complaint, but how that wouldn't be necessary. Fine, just kept my freaking mouth shut. So now, not only is Kay not helping things, she's actively making things worse. And what's more, her behavior's reflecting badly on me too. As my ex's divorce lawyer would most definitely use her messages in any kind of custody battle, so for the first time in about a week, I reached out to Kay to ask her to stop what she was doing. It was a well-worded, polite message, which I actually redrafted to make it sound as non-confrontational as possible. But still, she took it terribly. She tries calling using the messenger feature, and that won't pick up, and she just bombards me with apologies at first, confessing her love, until her mood switched and her tone got decidedly nasty. I don't want to go into too many details, but what she said, it was long-winded, drawn out, and thoroughly upsetting. But let's just say a lot of it involved my crumbling marriage and my ability as a father, something that really hit home at the time. I was heartbroken, but I had the wherewithal to do the right thing and just cut Kay out of my life. I blocked her on Facebook, Discord, and Steam, and foolishly think she's gone for good, and that I can do my grieving in peace and get back to online gaming when I feel good and ready. Literally about a month later, boom, the pandemic happens. I don't mean to make light of a horrible situation, but the whole work from home thing was exactly what I needed. I could do my homework in my own space, and I didn't have to suffer through having to go into public during my post-divorce stubble and hangover periods. Naturally, working from home meant Zoom calls galore. I don't think many people have even heard of Zoom before the pandemic, but now I think you'd be hard-pressed to find someone who hasn't. Just imagine owning stocks in Zoom pre-COVID. He'd be Scrooge McDuck-style rich right now. But anyway, one afternoon, I'm in a Zoom meeting with my head of department and a few of my coworkers. There's no real agenda. We're just kind of rambling about a new project we were working on, doing it more for the social contract than anything. It's a chill meeting, but I am psyched about the project. Upper management eyes won't be all over it when it's completed, and given it's my brainchild, my name is going to be all over it. When all's said and done, I can be in line for a shift up the company ladder, and you can only imagine what that prospect is doing for my self-esteem and confidence post-divorce. I'm drinking less and focused for the first time in months. You get the idea. So I'm not sure if you know how Zoom works, but unless the host sets a password, pretty much any Zoom user can jump into the call to either participate or, in some cases, disrupt it. But this is late April, and the fan of moronic YouTube kids hacking Zoom calls hasn't quite taken off yet. So generally speaking, anyone who jumped into the call was a company employee. A little box pops up stating someone's name. They can then switch their camera on and participate as well. So right in the middle of the Zoom call, same old thing happens. A little box pops up, and what we think it's like Adam from another branch popping in to talk numbers or something. Only, the name isn't anything we recognize. In fact, it's not even a name at all. It just has a series of letters and numbers that has a sound like hi, who just joined this new users and saying or doing anything. But we know they can hear us. I just assume we're waiting for them to load in or switch their webcam on or something, but we're left waiting in an uncomfortable silence for the longest time. And only when my head of department threatened to kick them from the card, they actually streamed the video. I didn't recognize who it was at first, but when I did, the sinking feeling of dread was indescribable. It was K9, only she didn't quite look how I remembered her. Instead of the cute bubbly features and shock of blonde hair, Kay looked like she lost a ton of weight, and the once glossy long hair had looked thin and greasy. And boss says something like, "I'm sorry, may I ask who just joined?" He tried to remain polite, but you can see how shocked and creeped out he is by what he's seeing. I mean, Kay looked awful, almost like she was dying. I should have acted quicker. I know that I should have just manned up and told my boss to kick her, that she was going to cause trouble. But on some level, I still cared about Kay. And seeing her in such a bad way was as upsetting as it was morbidly curious and horrifying. "Where you been?" she asked, using my real name. There was no denying it now. "I missed you so much. I haven't eaten. I haven't slept. I just need to know you're okay." "You know this girl?" one of my coworkers asked, but it was barely a question. It was more like an indictment. Like it was saying something must be wrong with me that I know a girl like that, and that somehow it was my fault. She was in such a state in the first place, I don't think I have long left, Kay. Then went on to say, following up with, "I just wanted to say goodbye, but I wanted to show you something before I go." She backs off from the camera a little. At this point, I know that I should have just hung up her screen, something, but we all just couldn't stop staring. and honestly, I felt like I was in some kind of dream. Raising up her arm, and we could all see that she had cut 4 letters into her arm. The cuts looked like they were scabbing over, but still looked incredibly painful, swollen, and possibly infected. But despite the grainy webcam footage, we can clearly say with the letters spelled my name. Then poof, she's gone. She hangs up. There's a stunned silence for a moment before my boss says something along the lines of, "I think you should go check on your friend." Next thing you know, I'm kicked from the call. At this stage, she might have just messed up probably the most important meeting in a long time, but I'm honestly too angry and in some ways worried about her. I jump back into my Facebook account, only it's my turn to dig up as much information on her as I can. I spin the message over to a guy that happened to be tagging a lot of her photos, asking if he's seen or spoken to Kay in the past couple of days. And this is where things get really weird, because I find out that this guy is actually her boyfriend. Yup, her actual long-term boyfriend of 2 years. Well, it tells me that Kay is fine and that she looked terrible because she's shooting a short horror movie for a community college course she's taking, one in which he's playing some kind of victim. By that time, I'm just stunned at how manipulative Kay is capable of being. She is willing to take a shot at ruining my career because I won't give her any attention. And she's actually unavailable. I'm so angry that I just think screw it and tell her boyfriend about everything she's doing. He legit knew nothing of all the harassment and confessions of love. Actually thanks me and tells me he'll be confronting her about it soon as she's home from college. I still have her blocked, but I figure I can check in with her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend. So how the whole thing went down. Look at this. Next time I talk to the guy, he's in the hospital. Apparently what I told him caused an argument that ended their relationship. Only the next morning, as they're leaving for work, she drives over him in her car. He rode a bike to work in the morning, whereas she drove, and this psycho decides she'd rather kill him than let him go. Guy got his hip and femur crushed and was seriously lucky not to lose his life. Pays arrest, and a couple of days later, the boyfriend passes information on to the media that she had been taken to a psychiatric hospital after a complete and utter mental breakdown. I told the guy how sorry I was, wished him all the best, and honestly, that's the last time we spoke. An insane story, all true, all that trauma, all that fear and suffering and worry because of someone I never even flirted with, even befriended outside of the game, barely even knew what she looked like or even cared. I just enjoyed playing games. That made me realize how crazy and delusional some people in the world are, and how someone online can completely destroy your life. Fortunately, I don't think my wife ever told her to voice layer about the messages Kay sent her. In the year after the fact, I get to see my daughter more often than some other divorced dads do, which is, thank God, a huge win for me. But despite all my efforts, I can't seem to quite get Kay out of my head. I'm slow to get back into the dating game, and it's honestly because I'm terrified that I'll meet another girl like her, because I might not survive another girl who's possessive, manipulative, or downright evil as K9 either physically or emotionally. Okay, so for some background, I'm a female and the story takes place. I was a junior in high school, so I was about 16 to 17. Throughout the story, I'm now a sophomore in college, so this is about 4 years ago. I get to school on the first day, and my Italian teacher is new. He was an old, maybe only about 25 or 26. He looked nice enough, not visibly creepy. He was pretty short, maybe only about 5'7", and I'm 4'11" and 100 pounds. So basically, everyone is bigger than me. We'll call this teacher Mr. C. Fast forward a month or two, I remember it was just starting to get cold out. Everything in this class has been pretty normal. I do notice he basically only calls on girls and stands a little too close, but nothing too out of the ordinary. I did the musicals in high school, so I would often be there until about 9 or 10 p.m. rehearsing. This one particular day, there were parent-teacher conference, so basically, all the teachers were there very late. For musical nerds like me, we were doing Legally Blonde and I was playing Margot, one of Ellie's friends. My costume for this scene was a little raunchy. It was a short white tennis skirt with an athletic tank top and some Converse. I also had on a little pink bow in my hair, and that part is important. So I have to pee really bad. So I walked quickly to the closest bathroom, which was upper floor and down the hall. Mr. C's room happened to be a few doors down from the girls' bathroom. Most of the teachers had finished their conference by the time and had left. I saw a light on in Mr. C's room, so I glanced over, and he was sitting in there by himself packing up his stuff. I didn't think he noticed me, and I kept walking till I got to the bathroom. I did my business, and as I was finishing up, I heard the bathroom door open. I thought it was weird, but just assumed it was one of my classmates. But the footsteps sounded a little too loud to be a high school girl's. So I walked out of the stall, and literally just standing there in the bathroom was Mr. C. I was just standing there frozen. This was so weird. I tried to say something, but nothing came out. I was honestly freaked. After a few seconds of just staring at each other, he handed me my bone, says, "You dropped this, Cherry." I just gave him a little smile and quickly thanks, grabbing it, got out of there. I didn't even wash my hands. I was honestly so incredibly freaked out. It wasn't until a few seconds later that I realized the economy Cherry. This made me stop dead in my tracks. My dad calls me Cherry because I had red hair as a little kid. It's brown now. Literally no one knew about that nickname, not even my friends. My dad had passed away 8 years ago. I started running until I got back to my classmates. My friend Eva noticed that I looked shaken up. She asked me what was wrong, and I just broke down crying. It wasn't really about my creepy teacher. More about the memories of my father, I suppose. She quickly took me into an empty classroom and sat with me while I cried. After I'd gotten on most of my tears, I told her everything that had happened. She was livid, but I convinced her not to tell anyone because I was embarrassed. I know, I'm an idiot. She didn't have Mr. C, but stopped by my class with him once to grab my car keys when her art project was in my car. She told me later when we were driving home that he had looked at me really weirdly. She said it was the way a predator looks at its prey. Yeah, huge red flags everywhere. But I was super innocent and just generally naive at the time. After this, nothing happened for another month or two. I had honestly forgotten about everything, but I still remember the day my life changed forever. The day everything started, January 16th. I had just gotten home from school and went on Facebook. I had a friend request from a guy named Jake. He was super attractive, and a few people from my school were friends with him. So I assumed he went to a school in a nearby town. I shrugged and accepted his request. What I didn't notice was weird was that he had about 5 photos, all posts in the last 2 days, but I ignored it. So basically, 5 seconds after I accept, I get a message from this J kid. He says, "Hi, cutie," with a winky face. We talked for hours, and we both had so much in common. We loved to draw, had 2 older siblings, our parents were both remarried. Our favorite color was both periwinkle. Well, we both loved Billy Joel. The list went on and on. It was honestly pretty strange. He asked me if I wanted to hang out, and I said yes, but that I had cheer practice and the rehearsal right after. He sounded pretty angry and told me I was lying, and then called me a derogatory term. He sent about 100 messages about how it was disgusting, and I started panicking and just blocked him. I tried my best to ignore it and went to cheer practice. Cheer was from about 5:30 to 7, and then I had rehearsal from 7:15 to 9:30. Ava and I planned to grab something from McDonald's in our 15-minute break. In the middle of cheer, Eva sprained her ankle, so her mom came to pick her up. After I finished cheer practice, I decided I would just go to McDonald's by myself. It was freezing, and I was in a tiny cheer uniform, so I ran to my SUV and hopped inside. I clicked the push to start button, and nothing happened. What? That was strange. I tried again, a few more times with no success. I called my stepdad and he said I should just leave my car there and go back inside, and he would pick me up from rehearsal and check out my car. I was honestly so angry about not getting my chicken nuggets that I hadn't even realized that I'd never unlocked my car. I knew 100% that I locked it, and I didn't have to unlock my car to get back in. I didn't figure this out until weeks later and actually cried when I realized, because that meant that someone had actually messed with my car. I bought this car myself, so it was kind of my baby. Also angry and stopped my way back inside, having no clue why my car wouldn't start. A kitty not the second I walked inside, I slammed right into Mr. C. I had no idea why he was still at school. The only other teacher here was my drama director, so he really shouldn't have been there. Sorry, I murmured, quickly walking away, when I felt a hand grab my arm. Like honestly, really tight. And I even winced a bowling back to him and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, but my car wouldn't start. His face literally lit up. It was actually really creepy. He said, I was actually headed to McDonald's if you wanted to come with me. This is when I started to freak out. How did he know I was going to McDonald's? Why was he asking me, a child, to come with him to McDonald's? That was not normal at all, and I felt pretty scared. I actually have rehearsal, thank you though. His face quickly changed from happiness to extreme anger. I really got terrified of what this man was playing. His grip was still on my arm and I felt trapped. He took a deep breath and said, well, I'll be waiting here after your rehearsal, and we can go after. I have a black pickup truck. He quickly walked away to make sure I didn't have time to answer. I just stood there in shock, not knowing what was going on. My friend Maya suddenly appeared saying my director was looking for me and I needed to come to rehearsal. I quickly sped off with her, trying to figure out what I was going insane or if that had actually happened. After rehearsal, I was so genuinely terrified that I asked my stepdad to come to a different entrance because I said I was exhausted, and asked if he could go get my car tomorrow. He reluctantly agreed. On the way home, we passed my car, and sitting right next to it was a black pickup. I just about stopped breathing, but tried to calm down not to show my stepdad. Again, a dumb move on my part. I should have just come straight forward. The next day, I received a text from an unknown number when I woke up. It said it was from Jake and he apologized. Everything said he was having girl troubles and was so sorry. Like the idiot I accepted it, and we began talking again. After a little bit, I mentioned the school that I went to, and he said his uncle worked there. I was shocked, and as to I didn't even know what I was expecting, but of course he said Mr. C. Then he sent a blurry picture of a man and a teen boy fishing at a lake, and the man was obviously Mr. C. But the boy was not this Jake kid. Like it was someone completely different, and even in a different ethnicity. And then I realized that this person I was talking to was Mr. C. I immediately powered off my phone and just started crying. I was so freaked out. A mom walked into my room with my laundry and saw me sobbing. She asked what was wrong, and I broke down and told her everything. She flipped her lid on, called the cops, talked to my school. The next day, Mr. C wasn't in class. I found out a few weeks later that they found a ton of illicit images of children on his computer, and when they asked what his intentions were with me, he flat out said he was in love with me, wanted to get me pregnant, steal me, and marry me. Yeah, I'm still very traumatized after a few years. I know my story isn't as crazy as some people's, but it could have been much, much worse.
I have been a trucker my whole life. I started at the age of 18. I was the only one responsible to earn for the family, and my uncle had introduced me to the truck and the truck life, and it was something that fascinated me. And I decided to drive into it and become officially working as a trucker at the age of 18. My first few months as a trucker, I was really doing the long trips. I loved the long journeys. When I was young, it was better. I could do the long trips. Interesting stories were made in that period.
I met people. A lot of people were inclined to get a hitchhike in a truck. Makes one heck of a story to tell, and I was always excited about the people that I would meet on the journey. I was more cautioned about it. I was young and naive, and I thought maybe I control everything in the truck and I would think that there is no way creeps are going to cross paths with me. But one fine day, or would say night, that was not the case. It was December 25th, the holy night of Christmas, and I was out on the tour, and it was just something that had to be done. It was a medical supply shipment, and I just could not say no to that. That's the work of God, and I could possibly not refuse to that. So I was working the Christmas shift. I was working on the shift and trying to get it all delivered in time. The shipment was an emergency shipment, and they needed it in around 12 hours, and I decided to do just one stop after taking the shipment, and it was Lover's Stop. And I took all the resources and snacks and started my journey, and I just put my foot on the accelerator and just kept driving. And about at 4-hour mark, I saw 2 cars tailing my truck. I knew what was about to happen, so I made sure that my foot never gets away. And then I saw one of the cars come at the side, and he shot at the truck, and I just kept driving, and I knew I couldn't stop, and so I kept going. And around in 6 hours, they managed to get me to stop the truck. I wasn't going to let them stop me, so I said openly, I have to deliver this medical equipment. It is an emergency. They need this in 6 hours, and you are already delaying my shipment. It is the matter of 6 people. Here, take my number and meet me tomorrow at this very spot, and we will see this then. I am going now. Don't follow me. And then I left, and hoped they didn't shoot me or follow me, and they didn't. As promised, I delivered the shipment in time, an hour to spare, and decided to do right on my promise and meet them at the same spot the next day. They were not there. That was the ballsiest thing I ever did as a trucker, and I guess it still is. I got an offer to be a commie chef at a garden festival in Frodsham, which is basically a really posh rural part of Cheshire. The gig was offering posh nosh with all the mobility of the burger van, and since the company involved was offering a rather generous way to pay for just a weekend's work, I couldn't exactly afford to turn it down. So on the day in question, I drove out the fridge and parked my car up and started looking around for the food service facility. They looked quite nice from the outside, and the guys on the line looked like they were having a right good laugh. But when I actually got to grips with the service, I started to see how the catering company had tried to cut as many corners as possible to maximize profits. I honestly couldn't go into it without boring the life out of you with chef speak. So I'll just tell you one thing that really mattered. Most of the kitchens I've worked in lay grip mats down in places that can get particularly slippery, a basic health and safety measure that becomes bog standard across the catering industry. But not only was there not a single grip mat in that entire kitchen, but whatever they used for flooring was extremely slippery once it came in contact with even the smallest amount of liquid. And it wasn't long until the entire place became a giant big bloody death trap. The whole thing came to a head when there was a horrendous accident involving a plate of hot duck fat, but didn't see what happened. Oh my God, did I hear it. But it was this clattering of pots and pans, followed by this absolute blood-curdling scream. I'd honestly never heard anything like it in all my years of professional cooking. From what I understand, someone slipped and fell into something. Both guys went down with one grabbing the handle of a saucepan on the way. The saucepan happened to be full of hot duck fat that was being used to make the comfy ham. Hot, boiling, burning, sticky duck fat that clung to that poor guy's face. The wounds were absolutely horrendous, like his skin was peeling and blistering in sections, and I think some of the fat got into one of his eyes, because he kept saying, "I can't see, I can't bloody see." Actually, you know what? They look like a horror movie makeup, like the practical effects you see from 80s and 90s gore fests, and the fact that it was real, it was his actual skin. Christ, it made me queasy thinking about it even all these years later. That was Saturday afternoon, only about 4 or 5 hours into service. I've never walked out on the job before, ever, but I walked off that one. All it took was the head chef telling me to bloody get on with it when I told him how dire it was in the kitchen. If I was just some novice having a flap about nothing, fair dues. This was serious. That guy was carted off to a hospital in an ambulance with the word skin and grafted being thrown around. And there's the head chef telling me to just crack on with it. Nice chance, mate. Someone had suffered life-changing injuries on that line, and nobody gave a toss because all they were thinking about was their wallets. But I'll tell you what, that means it hurt all the more when that bloke took them to court and got a booster settlement from it. But seeing how little anyone cared, that was the scary part. People really are the worst whenever money's involved. After high school many years ago, I was in a bad place. My guardian had kicked me out after graduation. She didn't help me find a place to stay, so I lived in my car for a couple of months. I met some heavy metal dudes at work one day. I'd seen them around town, and all my other friends knew who they were. Everyone loved them. We became friends over a couple months, and they offered for me to move in with him. I agreed. Looking back now, I wish I had just stayed in my car. My two main roommates were brothers named Andrew and Seth. They were in a band. They also believed in the occult and anything of that sort. I never really believed in that stuff, but I'm not one to tell someone what they should believe. They had let me live with them rent-free for several months, so who was I to complain? Being the only female in a house full of young men, I was always looking over my shoulder. You never know who you can trust, and turns out, I was right to worry. Over time, their friends started to stay with us for longer periods of time, sometimes weeks. Their friends were another group of brothers that they had gone to school with. There were 5 brothers in total, but only 2 stayed with us consistently. The younger brother Mark was very polite. He cleaned up after himself and always helped with the household chores. The other brother, Adam, had a laundry list of mental problems. He had apparently done some bad drugs back in the day, and he had developed into what seemed like psychosis of the religious sort. He had done time in prison for assaulting a woman with the Bible. He would often look you in the eye and tell you he could see how you would die. Once, he told me that I was possessed by a demon and I needed my soul cleansed. Everyone in the house knew he had these problems, but he was their friend. They helped him through the hard times and gave him a place to stay. Otherwise, he would be on the streets. I was always on guard around him after the things he told me. No one else seemed to be as concerned as I was. They should have been. One day I was sleeping, and my phone rang. I was my boss. He asked if I could come and work an hour early. It was only 12 p.m. I was broke and had nothing better to do. So I said yes. I got up and began getting ready to leave. I walked out into the living room to see Mark and Andrew sitting on the couch, while Adam sat on the floor by the TV. He was watching scripture videos on YouTube, some real end-of-day stuff. That was fairly common. So I went about my business. I said goodbye and left for work. My shift at work was almost complete when the phone rang. My boss answered, handed the phone to me and said, "It's for you." I was just a cashier, so I assumed it was a friend that couldn't reach me on my phone. I answered the phone and heard a man's voice that I didn't recognize. "Hi, this is Detective Williams. Something happened at your apartment today, and we need you to come into the station to talk to you about it." I left work immediately. I had assumed one of the brothers had been arrested for drug dealing or something. I was very wrong. I got to the station and was buzzed in. An officer escorted me to a small, cold room with a camera. He gave me a bottle of water and left me by myself for about 30 minutes.
My mind was racing about what could have happened. He came back and informed me that Adam had stabbed and killed Andrew at around 1 p.m. I was shocked. I had just left the house an hour before it happened, and everything seemed fine. I asked if there had been a fight. The detective informed me that there hadn't been a fight, and it seemed to have happened out of nowhere. I gave my statement to the police and left with nowhere to go. Still in shock and confused and in my mind. Our apartment was a crime scene, so I went to another friend's house to watch the news report since the police wouldn't give me any information in the case. Over the next couple of days, the information began to be released. Adam hadn't just stabbed Andrew once, not twice, but he had stabbed him over and over and nearly decapitated him. After the murder, he ran down the road, still holding the murder weapon. He called 911 and informed them what he had done. I watched the news report in horror. We had known he was unstable, but this had fully confessed to the brutal murder and provided police with his notebooks. He had apparently planned to murder all of his brothers, my roommates, and me. He thought we were possessed by demons, and this was the only way to free us. Luckily, none of his other intended victims were there that day. Mark unfortunately witnessed the murder, but he was lucky I escaped. If I hadn't gotten that call from my boss, I wouldn't be alive today.
This happened less than a month ago. I'm a petite female in my 20s. I'm currently living in Mexico to escape life, a little after postgrad in a city that is not known as a dangerous place. A lot of foreigners live here, and I haven't heard any safety concerns. I'm living with my cousin who works from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., but houses are in a pretty good area with a school, nice hotel, and Starbucks within walking distance. Just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was, the incident happened while my aunt was visiting us from Mexico City. She stayed home all day with me, while I usually studied or watched Netflix. On this day, I was planning to have a chill day since I had woken up at around 11:30 a.m. I was watching something on my computer when I started to hear some loud pounding, like someone was working on something with a hammer. This was around midday. I thought my aunt had let some repairman in to do some work. I was under the assumption my aunt was still in the house, so I wasn't too worried and continued to watch my show. The hard noise stopped, and I heard two male voices talking casually. This made me feel more confident that they were there to fix something. I get up from bed to fetch my phone, and I don't have any service plan down here to message my aunt on Facebook to see what's going on. I didn't get a reply from her, so I just took it as she was busy and go back to lying in bed to not thinking of anything of the noise. 5 minutes later, I hear footsteps coming up the door. Take in mind, I'm lying in bed with my back to the door. When the door opens, I see a man. He was a pretty normal-looking guy with facial hair and dressed rather cleanly. Like if you saw him in public, you wouldn't think anything negative about him. As soon as he saw me, he shut the door and went downstairs. Then I heard another huge noise that I led to realize was him slamming the front door shut. My room is first room above the stairs, so the first thought was that this repairman accidentally opened my door. I thought he was trying to get access to our patio. I was a little confused, but again, didn't think anything of the situation. I slowly walk downstairs calling my aunt's name, but I get no response. As soon as I make it down the stairs, I hear my aunt in a panicked voice saying that they robbed us. They took the TV. She forgot to lock the first iron door of the house, which made it easy for them to break into the second door. She said that when she was walking by from the store, she noticed someone by the house. She asked him what he wanted, and he said he was looking for a teacher.
and he got into a car with the other man and left. She didn't notice the TV in their car or anything suspicious until she got to the house. She mentioned that someone had rang the doorbell before she left to go to the store. When she went to check, no one was there. She believed they'd been watching her and my cousin, so when they opened the bedroom door, they were caught off guard and dipped. It's really frightening to think what could have happened if they didn't get scared off by seeing me. The cops came and were then telling me that they often kidnap girls or rape them. I know I got lucky.
On the morning of October 19, 1971, Cheryl Spiegel woke up a very excited young lady. It was her 10th birthday, and although she was headed to school that morning, her family had promised her cake and presents on her return home. Obviously, she was very excited. It was her day, her special day, so it was only natural that the birthday girl got a few extra minutes in bed, especially when her regular wake-up time was around 5:30 in the morning. If this meant that Cheryl didn't depart for the school bus with her brothers as she normally did. Instead, she left the house at around 6:25 a.m., headed out into the dark, foggy fall morning all alone. It was a walk that should have just taken a few minutes tops, but Cheryl never made it to school that day. In fact, the morning of Cheryl's birthday will be the last time anyone would see her alive in the mysteries surrounding her death, with puzzle professional and amateur detectives alike for years to come. Following her missing persons report being filed, local police officers conducted interviews with classmates, neighbors, and members of the Spiegel family itself, but not a single person could provide any useful information. The streets had been all but deserted when Sherwood appeared, when local newspaper began reporting sightings of Cheryl in the surrounding area. The police focused their investigation around the possibility of her running away from home, a dire mistake at a crucial time in the investigation, as it amounted to little more than wishful thinking. Because around 2 weeks later, a milk delivery driver was out on his usual morning rounds when he found he needed to take a leak. He pulled over to the side of an isolated country road when he noticed an odd grouping of rocks in the creek bed below him. It appeared as though they'd been deliberately stacked almost like a pyramid shape. The driver's curiosity got the better of him, and he headed down the slope to further investigate the odd formation. But when he did so, he noticed a small child-sized arm visible in one of the small crevices. The flesh was hideously discolored, with its owner obviously deceased, so the horrified delivery driver rushed to call 911. Shortly afterwards, emergency services arrived at the scene, collecting the corpse, which would soon be identified as the missing Cheryl Spiegel. The birthday girl had been stabbed a total of 26 times, with some of the stab wounds so deep that they ran through her completely. However, they didn't appear to have been the result of a knife. Rather, the wounds were small and puncture-like in nature, as if she had been stabbed with a needle-like instrument. She had also been stripped completely nude, but thankfully, there was little evidence of any kind of physical violation having occurred in a horrible twist of fate. It was her older brother's 11th birthday when her father was summoned to identify her body, forcing him to bear witness to the savage, frenzied manner in which she had been killed. Cheryl was buried 2 days after her body was found on November 6, 1971. Her family held a small ceremony for her at Highland Cemetery in Fort Mitchell, Kentucky, and the search for her killer continued with the ever-pervading question: did her birthday play any significance in her abduction, or was it simply a horrible coincidence? Homicide detectives surveyed the surrounding area but didn't find much of interest. The only pertinent location was a gas station, an ATM machine at a bank, and a McDonald's had stayed open until 5 a.m. Aside from those late-night businesses, there were no reasons to be in the area at such a time. But canvassing the area came up with 4 major persons of interest, all of which were spoken to by police.
The first was a man who lived across the street from the Spiegel house. According to more than one witness statement, this man would sometimes sit on the porch or in his car and watch the children, not in a wholesome way either. People say that there was something to this man's stare, something chilling in the years following Cheryl's murder. His concerning behavior continued to make his neighbors uncomfortable, even if he was eventually cleared of suspicion. Although he refused to take a polygraph test, which was highly suspicious, it turned out that he had an airtight alibi, as he had been working as a day laborer for a company in nearby Cincinnati. The second person of interest was another of Cheryl's neighbors, a drug-addicted member of a local car theft ring. He had served prison time, had a history of violence. Some was known to be extremely volatile. His alibi for the morning of Cheryl's disappearance was flimsy at best, and he openly admitted to having seen her walk to the bus stop, making him the last person to see her alive. However, he was open to taking a polygraph test, and he actually passed it, despite several people in the street saying they were terrified of him. The third person of interest was obviously the person who claimed to have found the body, the milk delivery driver. This man lived several counties away from the milk company, but he would end his route each day on the road where Cheryl's body was discovered. This daily proximity to her and her family would have given him ample opportunity to plan a successful kidnapping. However, there was no other evidence of his guilt. The man passed a polygraph test and was said to be emotionally devastated by the accusation. Not long after, the police ruled him out. The fourth and final person of interest was a small business owner from the same town. This man was not initially on the police radar as being involved in Cheryl's murder, but several years after, he was charged with assaulting young girls, pleading guilty in a court of law. There was local talk about him bragging about having stabbed Cheryl and putting her in the creek, but the man flatly denied those rumors as hearsay. Police did interview him, and he agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed beyond him supposedly bragging about the murder. There was no forensic evidence to ever tie him to the crime. It should be made clear that Cheryl's dad and stepmother were never considered suspects, and her biological mother was nowhere near Kentucky during the early 70s. However, a couple of interesting facts remain. Cheryl's father said he saw his daughter leave for the bus stop at 6:25 a.m., and no one else reported having seen Cheryl out on the street, which surely would have been busy with other kids and parents out and about that morning. What's more, after Cheryl's body was found, no headstone was ever purchased for her by her immediate family. And the speaker was left town entirely just 2 months later. Cheryl's brother later said that their father never talked about Cheryl or her murder ever again. Whether this was down to guilt or simply grief, it's impossible to know. So what really happened to little Cheryl Spiegel? Was it some kind of horrible accident? Or was foul play to blame? And what exactly made all those tiny pinprick wounds that punctured the length of the breadth of her tiny body? At best, some kind of vicious predatory killer with an unusual weapon cost them. But at worst, someone or something is still out there, and it's hunting children.
I can't say Andre was a particularly weird dude. I didn't know him well, but every time we did speak, he came across as completely normal. He was a pretty quiet guy, not very talkative, but then again, I've never been either. His personal interactions with others, at least the ones I witnessed, appeared totally above board. And as far as I'm aware, he did okay in classes and never had any more trouble with his teachers than anyone else. What I'm saying is nobody I hung out with had any concerns about his sanity. The events of the coming years, which should show how horrible and terrible judge of character I had, then maybe those close to him knew the true face behind the mask. As for me, when the facts of this case came out, I was shocked that it only got worse from there. As often happens, life moved on after high school as did I, and Andre became a small part of my childhood. That one morning, as I flipped through my newspaper, the face from my past was staring back at me, and when I read in the article adjoined, it meant my blood run cold.
Since I'm not a professional writer, I thought I used the account the Texas Tribune's managing editor Brandy Grimson used in a feature she wrote for Texas Monthly. She states by 2004, Andre was 21 years old, deeply mentally ill, and receiving no treatment. On the bright, clear morning of March 27th, a change up the stairs to the third-floor apartment where Laura, his estranged wife, lived, and kicked in the door. Her boyfriend had already left for work. Andre was holding 3 knives, one of each of his intended victims. He first encountered Laura, who ran toward him screaming now. Andre plunged a knife into her chest. He then reached in and pulled out what he believed was her heart. He'd in fact extracted part of her lung. Next, he headed for the children's room, where Andre Jr. and 1-year-old Leah were sleeping. Andre held down his 4-year-old son and stabbed him before moving on to Leah. He carved out each of the children's hearts. Finally, Andre jammed a knife into his own chest 3 times and laid down beside Laura on the living room floor, expecting to die. Confounded when he did it, he slipped the organs he had removed into his pocket and walked more than 5 miles home. A few hours later, he went to the Sherman Police Department where he confessed to the murders and asked if he would be forgiven. I thought it was what God wanted me to do. He later told investigators after undergoing emergency surgery to repair his life-threatening stab wounds. Andre was moved to the Grayson County Jail, where his behavior became more and more psychotic. He gestured wildly and announced that he was going to save the world. He claimed to be the 13th warrior of the dollar bill and said that Laura and the children weren't dead, but that their hearts had been freed from evil. Horrified doesn't begin to describe my feelings upon reading this. He had always been hiding the monster inside him, or as often happens, had the specter of schizophrenia gradually take hold of him as he entered into his early 20s. It's an answer I doubt I'll ever get. Almost everything written on the case focuses on the monstrosity of the crimes rather than its causes. As shocking as this all was, the case was destined to only become more bizarre. I figured once the trial eventually came around, Andre would eventually be found guilty and given multiple life sentences or the death penalty. No matter the result, he would do just as he had before and slip to the back of my mind, perhaps only to be thought of on very rare occasions. It appears, however, he wasn't quite ready to be forgotten. Just 6 days after taking the lives of his family, my old school acquaintance gouged out his right eye. It was claimed he did so because of a Bible passage he'd read. Even after all this odd behavior, he was deemed fit to stand trial for capital murder. Just as I'd imagined when the time came, he was found guilty for all 3 murders and sentenced to death. The people for Texas had spoken, and the time had come for Andre to move off to his new home on death row. As before, I foolishly believed his and my stories had diverged for the last time, and nothing more could happen. Andre had one more card up his sleeve to play, however, and one more I left to black out. Once again, the story said he blinded himself because of the very same Bible verse. However, this time, he upped the ante on 2 counts. Rather than stabbing out the offending eye, he yanked it out from the socket. The second part was far more gruesome. When the guard had discovered him in his cell covered in blood at the location of said owl, the answer was simple. He didn't it. Despite what he'd printed in all of the sensationalist newspaper articles, the true reason for blinding himself seems to be an attempt to force the state of Texas to give him the psychiatric care he'd been asking for since his arrest. The appears he'd gotten as wish, but as it stands now, his death sentence remains standing. The way things are currently, Andre is being held in a state psychiatric facility, awaiting his day with the executioner. That's the extent of any information I've been able to come across. As recently as 2013, a Texas Court of Criminal Appeal judge found the defendant clearly crazy, but also sane under Texas law. While I'm not here to discuss the finer points of whether the death penalty is a good or bad thing, that's a far deeper length,
and I'm prepared to wait until I think we could all agree the man has some problems. I've included only the most important facts in my retelling, but you will have no problem finding more through a simple internet search if you're so inclined. However, I do warn you, the remaining details are not for the faint of heart. For some readers, the outright gruesome nature may prove to be too much. You've been warned.
So this story takes place back in the early 2000s. I can't quite remember the exact year. It was late December, and Christmas was just right around the corner. My family tries to spend every other Christmas together, and we rotate on whose house will host the entire family. This year, it was my mother's turn. It was dinner time, and as you can imagine, with so many people in one house, it can get pretty crowded at the table. Most everyone decided that we're going to eat in the living room. Sometimes my mother didn't mind considering the fact that our kitchen table only sat, for I was sitting at the table next to my aunt with my small body. It was easy for me to sit on one side of the table with her. I had just stuck a large piece of broccoli on my fork and attempted to shove the vegetables in my mouth when it fell off my fork, landing in the cup of juice that I'd been drinking. I was disappointed, but the most rational thing in my mind. I got up with the intention of dumping out the drink in the sink. But before I could move, my aunt stopped me, questioning as to what I thought I was doing. I told her what happened and showed her the broccoli that was quickly starting to break apart in my drink. I turned to go dump the cup down the sink when my aunt stopped me again, telling me not to be wasteful and fish out the broccoli and drink the juice. I laughed, thinking she was joking, telling her, "You crazy," in a joking manner. But she didn't take it that way. Oh boy, did she not take it that way at all. My aunt went eerily quiet, and her face goes blank. I can instantly feel a cold chill run up my spine, and honestly had felt like I had stepped on a landmine. My aunt tells me in a low tone, "Don't call me crazy." My smile had long been wiped away, and I tried my best to backpedal, explaining to her that I didn't think that she was actually crazy, that it was just a playful spin on words. This didn't go over well either, because she grabbed my arm and leaned in closer, repeating, "Don't call me crazy." I instantly know that if I don't apologize, something bad would happen. So I quickly apologized to her, and that seemed to satisfy her. She made me sit down and hovered over me until I ate the now extremely soggy broccoli and chugged down the cup of juice. Now, this might not seem terrifying or scary at all. Well, that was just the setup for the events that were to follow that evening. Later that night, most of my family had gone out. I can't remember where, but the only people in the house were myself, my older sister, my aunt, and her daughter, my second eldest cousin. I was sitting in my room watching TV when I started to hear yelling from the remover. It quickly got louder, and I knew it was my aunt and cousin. I'm not sure what it started the whole thing, but I do know why it had escalated the way it did. The two were having an argument over something, when my cousin told my aunt she was acting crazy, as she did the same thing I had done earlier. But unlike me, my cousin didn't apologize. She tried to explain to her as I did, but just like before, she wasn't having any of that, and my aunt exploded. I'm sitting in my room terrified when I hear a loud bang from the wall causes me to jump. After the bang came my cousin's screams of pure terror. I was too scared to move until I heard Russian footsteps. I look at my door and soon see my sister running by. Next thing I know, I can hear my aunt screaming and ranting at the top of her lungs, my sister pleading and begging her to stop, and the psalms my cousin along with a loud thud noise.
I finally get enough courage to leave my room and look into the next room. And what I saw was an image seared in my mind to this day. My cousin was on the bed in the fetal position, trying to make herself as small as possible, just sobbing. She cried so much that she left a large wet spot on the bedspread. My sister's laying on top of her, using her own body as a shield, and my aunt is hovering over the two, just screaming like a mad woman, and in her hand is one of her shoes. It was one of those women loafers with a light sole and slight heel. She was using the shoe to beat both my sister and cousin, swinging away trying to make contact with any amount of skin. She was really just trying to get my cousin, but didn't care that she was hitting my sister in the process. I'm frozen in absolute fear, never having seen anything like this before. Sure, Mother got mad at me and I got the occasional spanking, but nothing like this. I'm afraid to even say anything and fear that my aunt will turn on me and start attacking me. I slowly start to back away when I look to the ground. That caused my eyes to widen. On the floor was my sister's jewelry box. It was all wood and had magnetic drawers to prevent the jewelry from spilling out if you knocked it over. It was just laying on the ground, all the drawers open, and jewelry spilled on the floor. I looked at the box, then to my aunt, and quickly figured out what that loud banging noise I heard earlier was. Yes, my aunt had thrown my sister's jewelry box at my cousin. Luckily, my cousin dodged it and hit the wall, but she had thrown it with so much force that it caused all the magnetic drawers to pop open. That's when I truly realized my aunt had lost it. I turned and ran back in my room, locking the door behind me, waiting for my mom to come home. I wasn't old enough to have a cell phone, and we didn't have a house phone, so there was no one I could call. I stayed in my room until the shouting stopped. Turns out, my aunt had just gotten tired of hitting and yelling, so she went outside to smoke. My sister hugged my cousin, comforting her until everyone else got home. What bothers me most is that the entire incident was just brushed off. No one said anything to my aunt, nor reprimanded her for her behavior. I think my aunts had made it all seem not like a big deal when my cousin deserved it, and so did my sister for defending her cousin when she was in the wrong. She was believed over us because we were kids and she was the adult. I know this isn't really as scary or terrifying as what other people have experienced, but of all the messed up things that have occurred in my life, this had one of the bigger impacts. I can't even look at my aunt without thinking about it. I will say this. My family is finally starting to recognize the true person my aunt is, that her so-called discipline was actually abuse. They refuse to condone her behavior anymore, especially my mother. Despite the fact that I'm an adult now, my aunt still scares me. But at least now, I have my family to back me up.
When I started working my last job, it was for people who had assisted living homes beautifully built to accommodate the elderly. Days before starting work at a newly built house, the company owner had me take some things over there one evening. It was autumn and growing dark earlier with nighttime, closing in pitch black. There were no lighted areas. It was an area where new homes were being built near surrounding woods with very few streetlights. Upon entering the new house, I went to find the place and was told to put the stuff down. I walked around, admiring the beautiful new rooms and furniture, although something seemed off. I knew that I was fortunate to be getting the full-time position on my preferred shift working in this beautiful new house. Although I was satisfied, something in the atmosphere seemed very off. That wasn't the expectant feeling of being a bit nervous working with different people with most of whom I'd never met, or the feeling of emptiness of a place or property having never been occupied. The entire area where the homes were being built just felt off. Business at the new house began. As it slowly filled with residents and more than enough work for one or two of them alone, the strange vibes from the house still going strong. It wasn't until several months later the workers began to mention strange experiences they had. This didn't happen until some residents had passed away in the home, but I did not consider that as being the reason for the strange events. Not entirely anyway. The first weird thing that I heard was that a coworker was telling me that she felt as though she was being smothered as she sat near a resident's bedside working the night shift. I will always remember the time that I was taking a break and making popcorn in the microwave. Some had burned. Fearing it would smell up the house, I took it to the garage that was conveniently attached to it. When I came back inside the house, the entire kitchen reeked with the scent of air freshener. There were plug-in air fresheners in other rooms of the house, but none in the kitchen at the time. The strong scent I was smelling was nothing like the other air fresheners, and they were not even the type that have the automatic sprays. I checked all over the house for any air freshener spray cans or cleaners. That may have been a cause for the scent, but found nothing. All fresheners were in the garage, and the residents were all sitting quietly in the living room. Some incidents that were told to me were from two coworkers that experienced lights turning on and off without them touching them. One worker said that she had turned out the main light in the living room because it was bothering the resident Ty. After helping all of the residents to bed that night, she came back from the hall, only to find it was turned back on. She thought someone was in the house. A worker on the midnight shift mentioned that she had the lights on in the main part of the house. She had gone into another area of the house, and when coming back out, she found the lights out and very dark. One evening after my shift, I was talking to one of my good coworkers over the phone, and she was working at the house. She told me that she had heard something in the whole area near some of the bedrooms. To her surprise, she found one of the Christmas ornaments that hung on a doorknob moving all on its own. It was repeatedly lifting out and hitting the door in a quick, timely manner, creating continual knocking. The ornament was very light, made of felt in Christmas colors, with small bells lined down the middle and front. There was also a small brown felt Christmas tree on the bottom of the front. All of the bedroom doors had one of these kinds of ornaments hanging from the outer doorknobs to decorate for Christmas. What creeped me out was the methodical, rhythmic way it was knocking, as if something was saying hello to you. I took a video on it on her phone, and I asked her what she thought about it. She said she didn't know what to think. She wasn't one to believe in ghosts. I thought that maybe she was trying to play a funny prank on me. I tried to use a fan to blow the ornament and see if I could get it to move like it had been before. The fan just made it blow in all directions, no matter what speed I said or where the fan was placed. It seemed to me that if a string was used to make it move, the ornament could have been much heavier for a quick pull of gravity to make that precise knock. Some months later, a new employee started working the midnight shift and was doing run checks. When approaching the door, the ones had the moving Christmas ornament. She heard the little elderly resident inside speaking with someone that sounded like another elderly lady. This was when all the residents were soundly sleeping in their own rooms. Some nights later, I was told that the same resident came out of that room in hysterics one night, fearing that demons would harm her. I heard of this happening at least twice. This was entirely out of character for her. Demons would never something she'd speak of. Perhaps she was reacting to something in that room. Years later, the room became open for another occupant. Another little lady came to stay. When she was being assisted to her room for bedtime every night, she always stood in the doorway, making the sign of the cross, and would say, "Bless the room." This I know to be true. I had seen her do it. No one had told her the story of it. It was all though she knew that something wasn't quite right with it. One afternoon, a worker came in for her shift, and the company owner also came in around the same time, needing some help taking some stuff down to the basement. I stayed over my shift to help. We braced the basement door, which was designed to swing shut and automatically lock. My coworker bumped a tall, thick drinking glass off the kitchen counter. He hit the hard-tiled floor, sliding toward the open basement door and down the stairs. It went. I could hear it hit every step before landing at the bottom. It was a tall stairwell, and I dredged cleaning broken glass. I went to retrieve it, not seeing any broken glass on the steps. When I picked up the glass, I find no breaks, cracks, or chips. Upon examining it, though, when I had been expecting to find it damaged in at least some way, there was also a kind of chaplain that will come to the house and tell inspirational stories to the residents. He would sing and play music to them and have them sing along. And I asked him if he could bless the house, and he said a nice prayer. One day when I was at work, a frequent visitor called me over to her and shockingly told me that something had just whispered her name in her ear. Another day when she was visiting, she mentioned feeling an oppressive, threatening feeling. As she went through her mother's clothes in the closet, she said that she was going to bring in some holy water and bless the house. She and I were in agreement on never talking about anything we discussed about the house, and we walked through the house in prayer. She marched each door in the sign of the cross with holy water, and the paranormal activity seemed to die away after that for a bit. One night, a coworker working the midnight shift was putting Christmas decorations on the fireplace mantle. She took pictures with her phone camera of how it looked when she was done. A picture I had her center my phone shows eerie bluish rays near the fireplace mantle by the ornaments and by the Christmas tree. She told me she had done a video in the room, and it showed some really crazy stuff, but she deleted it. It was fun to kid coworkers and put out Christmas ornaments like that one moving on its own, so I don't know what it was with the Christmas decorations, but something seems strangely attached to them. The house owner apparently bought many of them at different yard sales. I had also worked with two good coworkers, each in different years, who noticed the strange feeling from the house and surrounding area. The final creepy experience that I recall happening one afternoon when I stayed after my shift, and I was talking with a coworker and a visitor in the kitchen. We were talking about some of the weird things about the house, and she was sharing some of her own paranormal experiences that had happened in her own life. Right in the middle of conversation, 3 loud, distinct knocks could be heard coming from a nearby bedroom. It was in plain view. We all heard it. None of us record seeing anyone go in there, and residents would have needed assistance walking away. We opened the bathroom door to find it dark and empty. Many of these experiences what you will, but I guarantee you that they are all true.
Alexander Bean was born in the Scottish country of East Lothian. Sometime during the 16th century, his father was employed as a laborer, with duties mostly consisting of ditch digging and hedge trimming. Alexander tried to follow in his father's footsteps and take up the family trade, but realized rather quickly that the hard work and measly pay did not suit him. He is also said to have attempted to train as a tanner and become proficient in the process of treating the skins and hides of animals to produce leather. The modernity and paltry wages caused him to become fed up with the profession, but it seems he learned skills that he carried with him into later life. Skills that would not only just provide a means of living, but a great deal of infamy too. Alexander was not like other people. He was rough, ill-tempered, and violent, and he felt he simply did not belong around regular folk. So when he met a girl of similar inclinations named Agnes Douglas, nicknamed Black Agnes, due to word shock of black hair, as well as her distinctly dark personality. He knew he'd found his soulmate. Alexander's mother and father strongly objected to their union, having heard rumors that Black Agnes practiced witchcraft. So they told their son that he would be forbidden from living in the family home with his new belle should they choose to wed. The couple then chose to elope, leaving East Lothian and traveling across the Scottish lowlands, moving from place to place and surviving on what little work each of them could find. But the couple grew contemptuous of their employers, as well as the work they were doing, and one night they hatched a plan to earn some easy money. They would lay in wait at a crossroads near to a tavern, ambushing, murdering, and robbing weary travelers as they trudged towards what they assumed to be a safe haven for the night. The couple's dark deeds then took an even darker turn, when at one point, during a robbery and murder in Ayrshire, they decided on an easy way to cut their cost. Instead of using the money they stole from the victims to buy food, they would simply turn their victims into food by dragging their corpses before butchering and eating them. Alexander was used to dealing with corpses of animals and found the human corpse were all too similar to the ones he'd worked with during his tanner training. After one such incident, Agnes and Alexander dragged off the body of their victims to a coastal cave in a benign head between Gerve and Ballantrae. It was there they made a fire in which they roasted the poor soul's limbs, feasting on the flesh once it was properly cooked. The cave was almost 200 meters deep, and the couple discovered that during high tides, the entrance was almost completely blocked off to outsiders. They had managed to find themselves the perfect home, a subterranean lair from which they could launch raids into the nearby countryside, and one they could retreat to after the grisly crimes to avoid being apprehended by the law. The couple lived in the cave completely undiscovered for more than 25 years. Agnes and Alexander raised a family there, producing 8 sons and 6 daughters, who in turn birthed 18 grandsons and 14 granddaughters, all of which were products of inter-family breeding. What began as a small family grew into something that more resembled an actual clan, and as time went on, the Bean family turned their bloody work into an industry of robbery, murder, and cannibalism. They began to strip on remaining scraps of meat and organs from the victims, pickling the leftovers in barrels so they could more easily survive during the harsh Scottish winters. They also employ the rather shrewd strategy of tossing the skeletal remains of their quarry into the sea. The bones then would be washed up on beaches far from the coastal cave they called home, leading terrified villagers to believe that it was, in fact, animals that were attacking and eating travelers at completely different locations, effectively throwing them off the beaten family scent altogether. Naturally, the frequent disappearances did not go unnoticed by the local villagers, but the Bean family remained hidden in their cave during the day and only ever ventured out under the cover of darkness to claim their victims. The methods are so furtive that the villagers were completely unaware that there was a group of murderous cannibals living right under their noses. As the years went by, more and more villagers seemingly vanished from the face of the earth, and the more they did, the more the local population seemed to take note. Eventually, several organized searches were undertaken in an attempt to find those responsible for the vanishings. During one such search, it is said that a group of men noticed the coastal cave that the Bean family had called home, but were unable to believe that anything human could survive in it, and thus failed to properly explore it. But if they had, they would have discovered horrors beyond their imagining. Unable to locate the culprits, the local townsfolk became incredibly frustrated and volatile in their quest for justice. They actually ended up lynching several innocent people, brutally executing them in spite of their pleas for mercy, and totally ignoring their insistence that they were guiltless. They often suspected local innkeepers, since they almost always happened to be the last people to see the victims alive. Several were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night and hung from branches of large trees nearby. Still, the disappearances had continued. And then one night, as a married couple was returning from a local county fair on horseback, the Bean family spied their approach. They ambushed the couple, dragging the wife from her mount and savaged her as she lay in the road. Then they tried to do the same to her husband, but found he was not so easy to be overpowered. Little did they know that he was a former militiaman who was skilled in combat and carried a sword and pistol whenever he went out riding. The husband was able to hold off his attackers, but as he did so, he was forced to listen to the blood-curdling screams of his wife as the Bean family tore into her with knives and hatchets, carving her up while she was still alive. Eventually, after the husband had dispatched a fair few of the Bean family himself, a group of travelers who were also returning from the very same county fair appeared on the same trail and were horrified to have stumbled on the grisly scene that lay before them. They ran to assist the former militiamen, chasing the Bean family away with their superior numbers before escorting the newly made widower to the local magistrate to tell them of what he had experienced. Upon hearing the pure animal ferocity of the attack and how the poor, murdered wife of the former militiaman had been carved up and butchered while she was still alive, the magistrate seemed convinced that those responsible for the many disappearances over the years had finally been discovered. With local authorities sounding the call to arms, it wasn't long before none other than the Scottish King James VI heard of the horrifying atrocities. He subsequently made the decision to personally lead a search of over 600 men and several bloodhounds on a quest to find and eradicate the Bean family once and for all. Using clothing from the bodies of the slain Bean family member taken from the site of the recent county fair ambush, the bloodhounds were able to track a scent trail which led all the way back to the previously overlooked coastal cave of Benign Head. Using flaming torches to illuminate the cave's dark interior, the King's men found the Bean family surrounded by the spoils of their blood-soaked pillaging. Piles of stolen heirlooms, jewelry, clothing, and gold coins littered the ground around them. But what lined the walls of the cave made the Kingsmen's blood turn to ice in their veins. Chunks of meat, human meat, hung dry from ropes that were strung above their heads. Barrel after barrel was stuffed with pickled human organ meat. The smell was enough to turn a man's stomach, but it wasn't nearly as disturbing as the inbred features of the clan that cowered before them. The majority of the family, mostly women and girls, were captured alive without a fight and dragged wailing from the cave by the furious King's men. But many of the men and boys ran into the depths of the cave and refused to come out, barking out that they would kill any man that tried to take them. Instead of risking their lives to root them out, the King's men placed gunpowder at the cave's entrance, blowing the opening sky high and ensuring that anything that remained inside would surely suffocate. Those that were captured were initially taken to jail in Edinburgh before being transferred off to Glasgow. Their captors were extremely disturbed by the family's lack of humanity, both in their physical appearance as well as in their morality, seeing them as no better than animals. The King's men subjected the Bean family to summary executions, believing they were too inhumane to even store in proper jail. Alexander Bean, the family patriarch, was subjected to a terrible retribution for the crimes he had masterminded. The King's men cut off his private parts and burned them before his eyes, a visual metaphor that he would never again pass on this rotten seed. He then had his hands and feet severed and was made to bleed to death, a slow and painful end to a truly evil man. As he was dying, he supposedly screamed out, "It isn't over! It will never be over!" hinting that some of the family had actually survived the raid by the King's men. After this, Agnes and the rest of the women, along with a number of the Bean children, are tied to stakes and burned alive. There may have been some truth to Alexander's claims that some of his ilk had survived the raid, as in the nearby town of Gabon. There are those that speak of a woman who appeared amongst the populace not long after the raid of the Beans' coastal cave home. Apparently, after being interrogated by the locals regarding her origins, she admitted to being an escaped member of the Bean family, who were, by that point, infamous for their murder and debauchery. She was reportedly taken to a nearby tree and hung from a bough while the Gabon mob roared with approval. Over the years that followed, truth passed into rumor, which in turn passed into legend. In these days, there are so many who dispute that Alexander Bean and his cannibalistic family even existed. The fact that Alexander earned the nickname Sonny Bean during the time that followed is a derogatory name given the Scots by their English neighbors. There's quite a flimsy argument that the whole story was concocted by Englishmen simply to give Scotland a bad name, but a remarkably similar account can be found in a book by Nathaniel Crouch, a compiler of popular history writer, who published his work in the year of 1696. In it, he tells the tale of an incident which supposedly happened in 1459, the year before King James II's death. A passage from it reads as follows: "A thief who lived privately in a den with his wife and children were all burned alive, having made it their practice for many years to kill young people and eat them. Only one girl of the family was saved and brought up to the Dundee, who at 12 years of age was found guilty of the same horrid crime when great multitudes witnessed her execution. Wondering at her unnatural villainy, she turned toward them and with a cruel countenance said, 'What do you thus rail at me, as if I had done such a heinous act contrary to the nature of men? I tell you that if a few did know how pleasant the taste of man's flesh was, none of you would forbear to eat it.' And thus, with an impenitent and stubborn mind, she suffered a deserved death." What's clear from this testimony is that even if some of the details have gotten confused or twisted over the course of centuries that followed, there was indeed a family of cannibals up in Scotland, maybe even more than one. A family that didn't just eat human flesh because they were forced to do so out of poverty, but because they actually enjoyed it.
I was hired to do a catalog shoot for a national company. The shoot was scheduled for August of 2014 in rural Montana. On the time Ken and I flew in, was driven to a quaint lodge in the mountains in which the shoot was based out of. I was introduced to a lady running the shoot from the company side. We had worked together once or twice in the past, and I was happy to be working with her again. She and I were soon joined by her assistant. The three of us spoke for a short time before I was shown to my accommodations. I had arrived late in the day, so after eating a small dinner, I turned in. The next morning, everyone involved with the shoot, maybe 12 people in all, met in a large hall for breakfast. Upon the completion of our meal, myself, the lady running the shoot, and her assistant cut into a Jeep and went in search of shooting locations. The models and a couple of other people I don't remember followed us in another Jeep. After an hour or more of driving, I spotted the beautiful rocky outcropping, and the lighting was fantastic on that day. So very little extra work was needed to get the shots I was looking for. A few hours later, I was done with that location. It was time for lunch anyway. The Jeep with the models returned to the lodge. However, my counterpart convinced me to see some breathtaking areas she'd seen on a walk the day before. She said she had arrived early in the morning and decided to take a walk before my plane landed. That sounded fine to me, and she insisted it wasn't that far. We'll be back for lunch soon after the others, no problem. After a 5-minute drive limited to the location, she led us about 100 yards down a trail that ended on a sheer ledge. No doubt it was a gorgeous spot, but I could see without the right light, the photos wouldn't be able to do it justice. I mentioned this, and she was close to the edge to get a better look. She went out much further than I would have recommended. However, I guess she was more occupied with her work than with her safety. After taking one too many steps, the loose rock off the cliff broke free, causing her to tumble down the sheer cliff. Her assistant, this cute and kind little girl, rushed forward, and if I had not stopped her, she probably would have followed her employer down the hill. Instead, I had her get a strong hold on me, and I slowly and carefully scooted toward the remaining ledge. I took a big breath and let it out, then looked over to see the poor woman curled up about 75 feet from us. She didn't move at first, and I feared the worst. However, the longer I stared at her, I began to see her body make small, almost indistinguishable movements. I let her assistant know this and asked if she could drive. She said yes. So I told her to run back to the Jeep and get help. Quicker than lightning, she ran down the trail, and a moment later, I could see the Jeep flying down the road in the direction of the lodge. Even if she was unable to respond, I wanted her to know help was on the way. I yelled down to her and could only hope she could hear what I was saying. The minutes seemed to drag on, but within an hour, a rescue team arrived to help. The two men were lowered down with a special stretcher and they attached it to her. When she was raised back to the top, it was clear that she was badly injured but still alive. An ambulance took her away. All that was left was the waiting. The shoot was obviously on hold until a decision was made on how to proceed. It was ultimately decided to cancel, at least for the foreseeable future. And that was the end of my part in this awful mess. I received no news for a few months, but then I got a call from her. The last 9 weeks had been a near nightmare for herself and her family. The initial swelling on her brain was so bad she was put into a coma. This would eventually pass, but the long hours of being stuck in bed almost drove her crazy. List of broken bones in her body went well into the double digits. Even at the time we were speaking, she was still working on crutches. Over the years since the accident, she and I have kept in contact. At the time of me writing this, she had 5 surgeries on various bones and parts of her body and will no doubt have several more before she dies. Despite the awful violence of the fall and the long agonizing convalescence she suffered through, she still has an austere sense of humor. On her last call just a week ago, she said if she could do it all over again, she might pick a shorter distance to fall from. A true heroine, if I ever seen one.
Juzo Itami was a Japanese film director born in the city of Kyoto on May 15, 1933. From an early age, Juzo's profound intelligence and natural talent was obvious to the adults around him, and towards the end of World War II, educational authorities local to Kyoto selected him as a designated prodigy. This meant he was transferred to the Togobetsu Kagoku Kakyou, part of a government program to foster academic genius. The goal of this class was to reduce scientists capable of inventing and engineering superweapons that would be used to defeat the Allied powers. Essentially, the Japanese government wished to create a class of evil geniuses, and Juzo was one of them. But thankfully, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki brought the world to an end, and the special scientific education classes were eventually dissolved in March of 1947. Yet, as he grew older, Jews have found himself growing less and less interested in science and increasingly drawn to the medium of cinema. He started his career as an actor in the 1960s, Ginza no Dora Neko, but quickly found himself much more comfortable behind the camera. Going on to direct the 1984 hit comedy The Funeral, his movies became something of a phenomenon in the late 20th century Japan, and were lauded as being funny and insightful. While remaining delightfully subtle, they often told stories that were central to the Japanese character, culture, and way of thinking, such as 1985's Tampopo, which tells the tale of a woman who set out to make the perfect noodle. But after establishing himself as Japan's premier comedic film producer, Juzo turned his attention to more serious subject matter. In 1992, Juzo held a mirror up to Japanese society when he made the film Minbar, a satire which poked fun at the traditional Japanese crime families known collectively as the Yakuza. The name Yakuza comes from a traditional Japanese card game known as Old Oishikubo. Is a game where the aim is to draw 3 cards which add to a total score of 9. The rules of the game are fairly complex, but the worst possible 3 cards to draw are 8, 9, and 3, pronounced Yaku-za in Japanese. The implication being that if you're in a situation where you're dealing with the Yakuza, you're in the worst situation possible. In the film,
Mendo Jusa wrote that Yakuza as being big dumb bullies with a ridiculous dress sense and a perverse set of morals. A set of morals which they believe made them as appearing as chivalrous samurai, but actually made them look archaic and foolish. The film culminates in the Yakuza family and Question being completely outwitted by a timid but intelligent female attorney, played by Jesus' wife, Nobuko Miyamoto. The film meant a national laughingstock of the much-feared Yakuza and sparked off something of the judicial revolution in which the police stepped up their prosecutions of Yakuza members, while media outlets began to refer to them as a Boryokodon, a disrespectful term meaning violent gangs. Naturally, Yakuza clans all over Japan were thoroughly outraged by the humiliating depiction of them, and some even sought direct revenge against Jews. Then, on May 22, 1992, less than a week after the film's initial release in theaters, Juzo was accosted by several members of the Gotogumi, a Shizuoka-based Yakuza clan, who demanded he apologize for the offense that it caused. However, instead of groveling, Juzo was defiant in the face of their threats and refused to be intimidated. The Yakuza then attacked, beating him senseless before slashing his face and shoulder with a traditional Japanese sword known as the wakizashi, one that is similar in design, but not nearly as big as a katana. Used for close-quarter fighting to behead a defeated opponent, and sometimes to commit seppuku, a form of ritually ending their own life. The brutal attack left Juzo with a large scar on his left cheek, one that would become a symbol of his rebellious defiance, and made the director instantly recognizable when in public, as the attack quickly became national news. As you might expect, the attack didn't silence Juzo, and he went on to become a hugely vocal critic of the Yakuza, says flagrant disrespect for Japanese laws and society. The attack on him by the Gotogumi only caused the Japanese government and police to intensify their crackdown on the Yakuza, and a series of high-profile raids saw several 100 Yakuza arrested and charged with offenses ranging from murder and extortion to tax evasion. For the next 5 years, judo was a thorn in the Yakuza side, and it reached the point where several rival Yakuza families actually put their differences aside and met to discuss a permanent solution to the problematic celebrity nemesis. Then, on December 20th, 1997, but then 64-year-old director was found dead just outside of his home after apparently jumping off an 8-story roof, and what was deemed to be a tragic event of him taking his own life. A popular Japanese celebrity gossip magazine had recently published an article alleging that Juzo was having a secret affair with a much younger actress with whom he had worked with on several occasions. Juzo denied the accusations in his notes that he had left and wrote that he would prove his innocence in a grand display of protest by taking his own life. This was viewed by some as highly suspicious, and although Japanese homicide detectives puzzled over the circumstances, it wasn't entirely unlike Juzo to react so passionately to a perceived injustice. However, and an interesting turn of events, Juzo, his wife, Nobuko Miyamoto, was subsequently placed under police protection, apparently to keep her safe from the Yakuza. But just why should she require police protection after her husband taking her own life was a mystery that would only be solved after an investigation by an American journalist. Jake Aldestein grew up in Columbia, Missouri, but moved to Japan at the tender age of 19 to study Japanese literature at Sophia University, one of the country's top private colleges. In 1993, Adelstein became the first non-Japanese staff writer at the Yomiuri Shimbun newspaper, where he worked for 12 years. After leaving the Yomiuri, that Ustein published a series of articles on how you can use a bus to Damasgoto, made a deal with the FBI to inform on Yakuza incursions into the U.S. in exchange for a liver transplant at the University of California, Los Angeles. In 2019, Adelstein published a memoir about his career as a reporter in Japan, Tokyo,
vice in which he accosts Goto of threatening to kill him over the story. It was a shocking exposure of just how deep the Yakuza influence still ran in Japanese society, and one part of the memoir proved to be a terrifying insight on just how much they hated director Juzo Itamae. An anonymous source told Adelstein that Dadi Masagoto, the same Yakuza boss who had ordered that scarring attack on Juzo in 1992, had visited him on the day of him apparently taking his life and ordered him to the roof of the building at gunpoint. He then gave Juzo a choice: jump from the 8-story building and give himself a slim chance of survival, or receive a bullet to the brain, which he most definitely would not recover from. According to the source, Juzo chose the former and leapt from the roof, unfortunately dying as a result of his injuries. In the aftermath, the Goto-gumi clan faked the note from Juzo, then leaked a false rumor to Japanese tabloids detailing the alleged affair that was referenced in the bogus note. It was the perfect murder, as there appeared to be no foul play whatsoever and no proof that Juzo had been forced from the rooftop as opposed to jumping voluntarily as a result, and no one has ever been charged with his murder. And the Goto-gumi clan has apparently gotten away with the murder of one of their greatest nemesis, not by being brutal enough to actually murder him, but by being devious enough to make him and his own life. No one knew where it came from. We all went to sleep the night before, and it was there the next morning. Not even the owners of the house on both sides had a clue how it got there. Neither homeowner ever heard as much as the hiss of air brakes. During the whole of that night, the only real indication of how it arrived was the trailer was sitting upon. I was still relatively young at the time, around 13, but the subject was a hot topic around the neighborhood, and every person I spoke to, whether a kid or an adult, was eager to talk about it. Our neighborhood was somewhere new and off by itself, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for folks to dump things out there. Dogs and cats were the most common, but 1 or 2 cars would turn up every year. A house, though, no one ever seen that or expected it. The days passed, but no information could be gotten from anywhere. Soon, it began to take on a spooky and haunted reputation, along with its phantom like a rival in the dark of the night. It did look a little familiar to that house from Psycho. The stories first reached me while I was talking to a friend's younger brother. Among the grade school kids, the house was becoming a very real symbol of fear, although it was just an old empty house to me. This fear didn't prevent some of the more adventurous of them just entering and exploring it. I witnessed a particularly funny episode just by chance. While loafing aimlessly around the streets, I was passing by in time to see a preteen boy running from the house in terror, claiming that something had grabbed him. Whether his imagination had gotten the best of him, or an older kid was having a bit of fun, the horror put upon this abandoned house had fully taken root in the neighborhood. While this was going on, a real boogeyman had been forgotten about. I'll not put his actual name here, not because of privacy, but that of the victims. We'll call him Rudy. Rudy had grown up in the neighborhood, and until he was arrested, was well liked by a lot of the parents, had voiced their fears early on because of his habit of hanging around younger boys. When he was released from jail, he was allowed to move in with his folks. Anyone who wasn't aware of his proclivities beforehand knew now every parent in the neighborhood watched him closely. But when the ghost house popped up, people's focus is shifted. A few of us teenagers were riding our bikes around the neighborhood.
The father of a boy we'll call Bill was looking for a son. I overheard him speaking to a young kid close by, asking if he had seen him. Nonchalantly, the boy said that he had seen Bill going into that ghost house with Rudy just a few minutes prior. And this got my full attention. The shock of the father's face is still crystal clear in my mind. I turned around and watched the father run full speed into the house. Most of us there stood transfixed as we saw Bill's dad disappear inside. Things were quiet for about the first 30 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, a loud ruckus broke out, followed by Rudy flying out of the doorway and onto the ground below. Billy's dad was close behind. He leapt onto Rudy, throwing fists as he landed. Bill came out a few seconds later, crying for his dad to stop. His dad ignored him, standing up and kicking Rudy to the ground over and over. Rudy eventually got to his feet and ran for home. Billy and his dad were right behind him. I continued to watch until they disappeared from my sight. Billy and Rudy would both claim later on that nothing had happened between them. Either way, Billy's dad had the support of most of the community, and Rudy declined to press charges on him. Rudy would eventually move away and out of the minds of most of us, until he was arrested 3 years later for abducting and killing 2 boys near his new home. Only then did we realize how lucky Bill had been. That night, as I'd fallen asleep, I remember wondering what was going to happen to Rudy and Bill's dad. When I woke up, things were normal for a summer morning. Around 9, I was making a bowl of cereal when I got a phone call. It was a friend of mine, and he was short of breath and excited. The ghost house. It's gone, man. I hung up and hopped on my bike. When I arrived at the end of the streets, I looked down and saw the empty lot as it used to be. I rode down to it, and a small group were gathering, talking to the neighbors. It was much the same as the morning when it appeared. They hadn't heard or seen anything strange. It seemed to leave just as silently as it had arrived. To this day, I haven't met a soul who knows anything about that house. Sometimes I think I dreamt the whole thing up. But then I speak to an old friend from the neighborhood, and my memories are confirmed. Of course, I don't believe it was haunted or anything like that, but I know for sure that something was wrong about it. And I pray that I never see it again.
The main incident that occurred was also witnessed by my boyfriend, had happened in our child's room. For context, our 4-year-old son's room is located directly across the hall from my room, and we can see it from our bed. In my son's room, there are some jackets hanging up on some hooks on the back of his door. This is a detail that comes up later in the story. We've lived in this house for about 3 years and never had something like this happen before. So we're sitting in bed on our phones getting ready to go to sleep when we both hear our son jump out of bed and run across a room to the door. His door is like halfway shut, so I can see into the room. But as I looked up, I saw the door move like he bumped into it. My boyfriend jumps up to go put our son back to bed. After a minute or so, my boyfriend comes back out the room, looking kind of freaked out, and whispers he's fast asleep. He didn't get out of bed. I walked out of bed thinking my son is just pretending to be asleep or something, and walk in to see him definitely asleep, breathing slow under the covers how we tucked him in earlier. My boyfriend and I are both kind of like, what, to each other, wondering what just happened. We sort of just settled back into bed when something that makes us so much weirder happens maybe a half hour later. My son wakes up whimpering, and we get to go check on him. He's pointing at the door where the jackets are hanging, saying this monster's playing with my jacket. I flip on the light and look around. I can't see anything. My first thought was maybe some sort of animal got into our house, and that's when we heard what he just saw. So I look around the room trying to see if there's a mouse or something. Our house is already small and clean, so there's not many places for an animal to hide, and I can't find anything. Plus, my son keeps insisting the monster was still behind the door playing with his jacket. Additionally, the footsteps we heard were pretty loud and really sounded like my son, so it just didn't make sense that there was such a small animal. My son wouldn't go back to sleep alone, so my boyfriend laid down with him so he would feel safe. This was such an odd event. My son never talked about monsters or being scared before this. It was so out of nowhere and so weird that we heard the footsteps as well. Ever since then, my son will sometimes wake up crying talking about a monster in his room. I wish I could find an explanation for what we heard. If we hadn't heard the footsteps, I would have probably dismissed my son's monster claims and not think much about them. Any ideas of what we could do or any rational explanation? This happened when I was a bartender about 4 years ago, but I think about it often, and it has changed the way I operate throughout life. I now refuse to go to any store alone after midnight. I was 25 and an attractive slender blonde at the time. On a busy Friday night, I was bartending with the bar manager, and he had noticed that we were very low on some bar necessities after the dinner rush. Lemons, limes, bitters, that kind of thing. So I was sent out to a 24-hour grocery store down the road to pick up the odds and ends that we would require to get us through the weekend. I picked up everything that was asked of me without trouble at the store, until I got to the liquor aisle. There were two country-looking guys that were probably around my age in the aisle, and they were staring at me and whispering to each other in a way that made me uncomfortable, so I assumed they were making comments about me, all pretty innocent so far. Before they could approach me, I grabbed what I needed very quickly and power walked to the self-checkout. They really booked it out of there, because when you're a bartender, it's kind of like you're on a stage and are required to be charming and interact with people that you otherwise absolutely wouldn't be able to tolerate unless you were being paid to do so. This is another reason why I'm not a bartender anymore. They get the self-checkout and hot on my tail. The two guys, I'm scanning my stuff, and they use the scanning station next to me. I get a better look at them now as they are right next to me. One is taller, muscular, an average look. The other one is shorter and more plump. They both looked dirty, and their eyes were completely bloodshot. I'm not even sure if they were high or something, or had already been drinking for a while. They continue to stare at me, and our eyes awkwardly met. So I did the pleasant Midwestly thing to do and flashed them a quick, half-fast, closed-lip smile to be polite. The taller one starts trying to talk to me. "Hey, looks like you're ready to party." "Huh?" I replied something like, "Yeah, something like that. It's not for me, though." They walk close to me and ignore their responsibility to scan their items. "Oh, must be for your boyfriend." Ha! I flash the awkward, tight-lipped smile again and roll my eyes slightly. Like this is your hint that I'm not interested, fellas. The taller one continues to try to talk to me. "You should come hang out with us tonight. We could show you a real good time if you know what I mean." "No thanks, I'm good. Already have plans." But the taller one starts to get upset that his moves aren't working like he'd hoped, and starts using a more threatening tone and moves very close to me, literally 2 inches away. But I ignore him, staying focused on the scanner. I don't think he had showered in a few days by the smell of him. He gets a little louder and says, "I see how it is. You probably only screw doctors and rich men like that. You think you're too good for us. We can show you that you want. We can teach you a lesson." Now I'm not sure what context he meant this in, but it definitely wasn't good. Still looking at him, I turn away. So my body is blocking his view of my purse, which I set on the scanner to grab my 4-inch pocket knife out and slide it up my jacket sleeve in case I need to protect myself, acting like I'm searching for my wallet. I do this, however, in view of the self-scan worker station at the podium, and look at her eyes with wide eyes trying to communicate that I do not feel safe and that I might need help. I turn back to the machine and slide my credit card to pay, while the creepy and hostile guys are practically standing on top of me. The machine malfunctions and starts beeping. The lady worker comes over immediately, and the guys standing next to me change their expression from "I'm planning to torture you for a few days and toss your body to a creek" to just your friendly, good old country boys making polite conversation of their hair. They actually tried to act like I knew them and were friends, so the worker wouldn't be alerted to their ill intentions. They tried joking with the worker, saying I was stealing something and that's why the machine went off. The worker was definitely not buying it. She was a 6-foot-tall woman with some muscle on her. I wouldn't mess with her on my best day. She pressed a few buttons on the screen, shooting. The guys have a very unimpressed look when they were trying to act charming and cancels the order completely. She turns to me and says, "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. The machine seems to not be working correctly. Will you gather your things and I'll ring you up at an actual register?" She puts her hand on my back and gives me a wide-eyed look like I gave her a minute earlier, letting me know that she sees I'm in danger. I pick up my things and follow her to the register that's near the security office. The guys linger around the self-scan, still glaring at me, and eventually complete their purchases, but standing at the exit assuming they're waiting for me. I felt like I would be walking to my death. If I made it to the exit in that moment, the workers kept a close eye on the guys and scans my items. As she's scanning, she tells me there really wasn't anything wrong with the machine I was using. It just misread my credit card, and she said I had a bad feeling about those guys from the moment they walked in. And when I saw them getting aggressive towards you, I already ranked security to be ready to walk you to the parking lot and make sure you left safely when you're ready to leave. When I saw you take that knife out and put it in your sleeve, getting ready to protect yourself. Good girl. As much as I'd like to see you show them they picked the wrong girl to mess with, I'm glad I was able to pull you aside and make sure you were safe. I see them waiting by the door for you. I'll just keep pressing buttons on the screen and act like I'm having trouble with your order until they give up and go outside. Our security officer and I are both going to escort you to your vehicle when you leave. I thought to myself, this woman seriously deserves a raise. I thanked her over and over again and told her what they said to me, and I was getting afraid because I don't know what these guys are capable of. As I'm talking to her, my bar manager calls me to see what's taking so long. I explain what's happening, and he was obviously very concerned and ready to come up there himself and kick some ass. A sweet sentiment indeed. By the time I hung up, the guys had given up and walked out to the parking lot. The worker said to give it another few minutes because she had a feeling they may still be in there waiting for me to walk out and see which vehicle was mine so they could follow me. My instant thought was no way they have to be gone by now. But I was wrong. The worker and security guard escorted me out, and it was after midnight, so you can imagine how empty the lot was. Toward the back of the lot, there sat an old big pickup truck running with the lights on pointing towards the store. It was a huge parking lot, and it wouldn't have made sense for them to initially park like that, so I'm assuming they moved the truck to sit that way, so that they had a full view of when I exited the store and got to my vehicle. It was like being stalked by hungry lions. When I unlocked my car and they saw that me, the worker, and the guard were looking directly at them, and that I wasn't getting in my car until we watched them leave, they then peeled out of the parking lot. I mean, they seriously did a burnout to establish that they were pissed and trying to intimidate us. Our poor creeps didn't get their way. I thanked the worker and the guard over and over again, as I'm certain that they had just saved my life, or at least saved me from having to live with whatever those guys were planning to do with me. I did write a long letter to the store manager and their corporate location, describing how their employees protected me and how grateful I was. I really hoped that earned her a promotion bonus raise or something. She didn't know me at all and was ready to protect me, which really isn't her job, but she did it anyway. Needless to say, I do not go late night shopping by myself anymore, and never will again.
I was about 14 years old, and my family had just moved to a new town. I was also lucky enough to make a fast friend at my new school, and we subsequently made plans to go trick-or-treating together since it was coming up to Halloween night.
Because we were 14 and lived in a fairly safe neighborhood, my parents told us that they didn't think I needed to chaperone that year. So while everything was going great and we were having fun getting some solid candy, it was kind of cool just walking around our own, feeling sort of grown up. We knock at one house and this middle-aged man opened the door. He seemed happy to see my new friend and me, so I assumed we were in for some great A candy. I don't actually remember what candy he handed out, but I didn't remember what happened next. He asked us to come inside, which is weird, but we really wanted candy. So I guess we were dumb enough to take the bait. It disappears for a moment, and I kind of assumed that he was going to get us some candy. But when he re-emerges, he doesn't have any, only a camera in his hand. Then he asked if he could take a couple of pictures of us, explaining they liked to take photos of kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes, how he was something of a collector. At this point, even being a fairly naive 14-year-old, I got weirded out, yet knew it was best not to upset the man and let them take the picture, and then we could leave. So he takes the photo of us, waits for the Polaroid to come out, then he hands us a pen, asks us to sign our names on the back. Me and my new friend did as we were told, but although we'd been dumb enough to actually go into this guy's house with him, we weren't dumb enough to sign our actual names, so we wrote fake ones on the back just to satisfy him. Only then were we allowed to leave with the candy that he gave us after we signed. I don't know if this guy was on some sort of list or some sort of offender or anything like that. There were no more run-ins with them, and nothing in the way of rumors going around town. But I still get creeped out thinking about what he did with that photo of me.